Sky News understands that the general election will be held on the 4th of July. That is Thursday, the 4th of July, the next general election. That's according to sources Sky News understands. So, Beth, the rumours that we were all reading this afternoon seem to have been correct. The country will go to the polls on the 4th of July.
Yeah, no confirmation from sources within Downing Street at the moment, but a July 4th election. As I was saying, the Prime Minister had civil servants in last week to discuss the timing of a general election if he held it in the summer. There has also been a long open discussion within government about whether or not to hold it early or go in the autumn. Oliver Dowden, the Deputy Prime Minister, as I understand it, was one person really pushing for that summer election. And on the back of these good inflation figures, the International Monetary Fund telling upgrading growth forecasts, the UK coming out of recession, the Prime Minister looks like he is going to go in the summer. He's not going to wait to the autumn. He said all along, hasn't he, that he would wait for the second half of the year. Now, in the beginning, we thought that that meant the autumn, but he has very pointedly kept open the option of a summer election, and we are expecting to potentially hear from him from Downing Street. It looks like we are on for a summer election, July the 4th.
Indeed, Beth, and of course, as you lay out a number of those issues that the Prime Minister was looking to try and resolve have started to turn slightly in his favour. Of course, the one that really sticks in my mind, one of the things that the Prime Minister said in his 5 pledges that has not yet come to light, is the stopping of the boats. Of course, we've seen huge numbers, record numbers, come across the channel in small boats in the first half of this year. What's the sense there, Beth, as to why the Prime Minister would have decided to go early before, he can properly say that the boats have stopped, and before, let's think as well, let's remember that before the first flight to Rwanda has taken off?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kamali, and I think that has been the open discussion within government about whether or not to go in the autumn when voters potentially have proof that the economy is turning the corner. They perhaps feel a bit better off, and the Prime Minister's flights are off to Rwanda. There was also the argument about go now because boat numbers. What if you had a summer of record numbers of boat crossings? They're at record numbers at the moment, and the Prime Minister could find himself in hot water if that happened, given that he has promised to stop the boats. I think there's a couple of other considerations. It doesn't look like, given the current economic forecast, that perhaps the Chancellor would have as much wriggle room in terms of the economy in order to perhaps do another tax cut, a second fiscal event later in the year. And also, when it comes to inflation, it did come in at 2.3% in April. That's the lowest level it's been since 2021, but it was slightly higher than expectations of the Bank of England. So then the question is, are they going to be able to cut interest rates? So the Prime Minister is going to go now. And Kamali, this is a momentous task. To put it into context, he is on average 20 points behind in terms of the Sky polls of polls. So for a Prime Minister to come back from that kind of poll deficit to win, that would be a first. It would be a record-breaking performance. It's never happened before. It would also mean 5 consecutive Conservative Party election wins on the bounce. Again, hasn't happened in modern times. So I think it's fair to say that the odds are clearly stacked against him in terms of the polling. But what's driving Number 10's perspective? They think the polls will narrow. They think they've got a good story to tell on the economy, and they are ready to go, and they want to go early before the summer.
And Beth, look, poll lead of 21 points, according to our poll of polls, is massive. And as you rightly point out, it's going to take some overturning, isn't it, by the government. How do you expect the election campaign is going to be run? And let's, of course, as well spare a thought for the other parties. The Labour Party have been calling for this election for weeks and months now. I'm not sure if I heard Sir Keir Starmer call for it during Prime Minister's questions today. We certainly heard it from Stephen Flynn, the SNP Westminster leader, calling for the election. That's really when a lot of the speculation went into overdrive, wasn't it, by the Prime Minister's response there. What do you think we can expect from the election campaign that gets underway? And can you take us through the process as to what happens from here?
Well, look, I think in terms of the theme of the election campaign, the themes, if you look back to last week when Sir Keir Starmer did his pledge card launch, that was last week. That was meant to be his general election launch had there been a summer election, which now looks on. And that event had been planned for weeks and months, and they went ahead with it anyway. Their machine is ready. They had to be ready for May. They have got ready for May. And the big themes of this general election are going to be economy, migration, the NHS. Both parties with big pledges on both these, all three of those areas. So that's in terms of the themes. I think this will be the economy election, and the Prime Minister will go on a ticket of saying we're turning the corner, don't risk it on Labour in terms of the economy, and Labour will say look at the chaos of the Liz Truss administration, look at the chaos, as they would put it, of 14 years of Conservative government. Do you feel better or less well off? It is Labour that will bring about economic stability and grow the economy. So that will be their pitch. It will be the economy election. In terms of what the process is, if the Prime Minister does announce that July election, I think what might happen, and forgive me, Kamali, I'm trying to check my phone while talking to you just to get the latest, but it might be that they have to finish all the parliamentary business. Parliament then dissolves, and then there is a 4 to 6 week campaign, and we are all hands to deck. It will be an intense election campaign. So it might be now, and I can't confirm this because I don't know, but it might be that they have to cancel recess in order to finish some parliamentary business next week, or it might be that they try and wrap it all up this week to kick off that general election campaign.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Whitsun recess due to start tomorrow. If the rumours are right, and we are certain that the election is going to be on the 4th of July, you would imagine that Whitsun recess is going to be cancelled, because essentially what happens now is we go into wash-up, where all legislation needs to be got through before Parliament is dissolved and the election campaign proper begins, 25 days once Parliament is dissolved. The wags on social media telling me that the 30th of May may well be the date where Parliament is dissolved officially. Now, Beth, look, we've got the promises of the two major parties, haven't we? Rishi Sunak's of halving inflation, growing the economy, debt falling, waiting lists and small boats. And of course, as you mentioned, we heard from the Labour Party last week when Sir Keir Starmer gave his what turns out to be quite a fortuitous election launch, talking about delivering economic stability, cutting waiting times, border security, Great British Energy, antisocial behaviour, a crackdown and recruiting new teachers. But give us a thought, Beth, if you can, about some of the smaller parties, because this election is going to be interesting, because this election is going to have the Reform Party, who have done well relatively in recent by-elections, and might well prove something of a spoiler in some parts of the country. What do you think?
Well, look, I think there's a couple of things said. That I also just have had this from a former cabinet minister come in, that they are saying they think it's utter madness for a prime minister to call an election now while he's 20 points behind in the polls. I have to say there has been lots of unhappiness around Westminster as the rumour mill went into overdrive, and a number of MPs just thinking that now is not the right time to call an election. As I understand it, Isaac Levido, who is the Prime Minister's election campaign chiefs. A source told me earlier today that Isaac Levido was one who wanted to go a bit later so that they could prove that the PM's economic plan is working. So that is just a little bit more context and colour there. But just going back to your question about smaller parties, there are subplots of this election, of course. It is no doubt a runoff between Sunak and Starmer. And just to put it into context, this is a pivotal, historic-making election, whatever happens. If Starmer won an outright majority, I know I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here, but if he won an outright majority, it would be the biggest uniform swing ever. It's a record breaker if he won a majority. And as I was saying, if Rishi Sunak manages to come back from 20 points behind in the polls to win, again, he would be a record breaker. So whichever way this goes, it is an epochal, historic election. Remember, no one in this country has elected a Labour government from opposition since 2005. That's nearly 2 decades. So this really could be a seismic election for so many reasons. But to go back to the issue of smaller parties, reform, of course, are going to be a big story in the election. The deputy chair of the Conservatives, Lee Anderson, defected to the Reform Party. And they are standing candidates, and they are very clear. No pact with the Conservatives. You might remember back in 2019, the then Brexit Party did a deal with Conservatives that were Leave back in, and they stood down in those constituencies, Reform fighting them in every constituency. So, of course, there'll be questions about, are they going to pull the vote away? For the Liberal Democrats, they have been doing really well in by-elections against the Conservatives. You remember, perhaps back in 2015, Cameron wiped them out. You went into coalition. They had 50-something MPs. They came out the other end. I think it was, you're testing me here, I think it was about 8 MPs. So can they win back some of that ground? I think then there's a bigger picture in all of this, which is the prospect of a potential post-election deal should Labour not win an outright majority. I asked Keir Starmer about this just a week or so ago. I said, do you rule out any deal with the SNP? An emphatic yes. When I asked him the same question about the Lib Dems, he just wouldn't rule it out. Why was he not ruling it out? Because he knows that he might have to deal with them should he become the largest party and not win an outright majority. But of course, the Prime Minister and the Conservatives, they think that they have a story to sell on the economy. They're going to get some flights probably off to Rwanda, perhaps just before polling day. They are scheduled to definitely start taking off in July, and there's been talk that they could bring some forward. So you can see the narrative. The economy's turning their corner. I'm dealing with small boats. Don't risk it on Keir Starmer. That will be the argument, and he will go big too on national security. You had a flavour of that in the speech from Mr. Sunak last week, saying in this world which is becoming, in his words, more dangerous than any time since the Cold War, with Europe at a turning point, with our own defence industry, in the Prime Minister's words, on wartime footing. Don't risk it with the other guys. That will be the other argument he will be making.
Look, absolutely right, Beth. And look, the one thing as well you didn't mention there in that sort of summation of all of the factors that are going to play into this election that we expect to be on the 4th of July is the situation in Scotland as well. Because as you mentioned, if the Labour Party are to take a majority, many analysts say that has to go through Scotland. They need to do well in Scotland. Remember, the last election essentially wiped out, and the SNP have had, let's call it, a difficult few months recently, so they will be looking to try and hold on to dear life for their seats in Scotland. How is that, do you think, going to play into the way we see the election campaign running?
Well, we often talk about Scotland, about there's no route for Labour to get back to power without Scotland. But Isla, our very clever election guru back at Sky, who works with Michael Thrasher, pointed out to me the other day that Tony Blair won a majority without Scotland in 1997. But you are absolutely right that Scotland is pivotal to Labour this time around. They were nearly wiped out in 2019. I think they returned one MP. I think they've got two in Scotland now. That I'm not entirely sure, but I think they've got two. But the point of all of that is, with the SNP really falling back in the polls, their leadership woes, the police investigations around the former chief exec of the SNP, Peter Murrell, who's Nicola Sturgeon's husband. With all of that, they are not doing very well in the polls. Labour having a resurgence in Scotland, and they are definitely looking at winning 25 to 30 seats up there. And when you talk to Labour strategists and when you talk to them about the local elections and the national equivalent vote, you remember that's when you take the local election results and you extrapolate it out. They say, look, the point of all of this is that doesn't take into account what's going on in Scotland. And in Scotland, when we were talking about those projections of a hung parliament, we are going to win big. That's Labour's view. So they think that they are on track for a majority. You might not hear them saying it publicly. What you will actually hear Sir Keir Starmer say is, I'm taking nothing for granted. But they certainly are confident that they will have a big win in Scotland. And I think in terms of the themes of this election, politically, in terms of the electoral map, there will be, of course, the battle for Scotland, the battle for the Red Wall, those seats in places in the Midlands, in the north of England, that turned red, turned blue, long-held Labour heartland seats, some in the northeast, some in the West Midlands, some in the East Midlands, that turned to Boris Johnson in that Brexit election. Can Keir Starmer win those back? That's one battleground. And then the blue wall, this battle for the southern Conservative heartlands, and that's been played out by the Liberal Democrats, but also by the Labour Party. So we've got three different themes. I think another theme of this general election is going to be the issue of Gaza, the Hamas-Israel war, and what has happened there in terms of the way in which that is depressing the Labour vote, with many of their traditional voters, many in Muslim communities, just simply not voting Labour. And there's some MPs that could be vulnerable to that. Jess Phillips, who I do my podcast with, in her Birmingham constituency, you saw it in the West Mids mayoral race, the independent candidate there taking 30+ thousand votes. Wes Streeting in Ilford, he might have an issue there, and Shabana Mahmood, another Labour Party frontbencher, also with a real problem. So I think that will be a theme of this general election as well.
Fascinating stuff. Right, Beth, look, hit the phones. We'll have more from you later. Beth Rigby, there, our political editor. With that news that the Prime Minister is going to be calling, we expect, Sky News understands, a general election for the 4th of July. We're expecting to hear from the Prime Minister a little bit later on this afternoon stroke evening. There's currently a cabinet meeting going on in number 10, just behind where Beth was reporting to us from. But as we say, Sky News understands that the general election is going to be called on the 4th of July. Let's bring in Chris Hopkins now, a political research director at Savanta. Chris, great to have you with us. So, look, it seems as if he's gone for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the first day of pollster Advent, I guess. So we're gearing up for Christmas morning, which is seemingly going to be the 4th of July. And yeah, I think that this has been a long time coming, frankly. Yeah, I think as soon as the Fixed Term Parliaments Act was no more, the prerogative of when to call the general election has been firmly in the hands of the Prime Minister. And I think the massive difficulty that Rishi Sunak has had is that there has never been an optimum time to either call one or hold one. His party have been very behind in the polls ever since he inherited the Conservative leadership and therefore being Prime Minister, and it's never really improved. It improved significantly, I guess, straight away because Liz Truss was 30 points behind, but generally speaking, the polling average has kind of sat around that 20-point mark for a significant chunk of Rishi Sunak's premiership now, and frankly, he's banking on an election campaign being a driver to improve that, and that is a huge risk. But still, if not the 4th of July, then when? Because frankly, the outlook for the Conservative Party, whenever they would hold the general election, doesn't appear to be particularly rosy.
No, and Chris, look, once we're into the election campaigning now, do we expect that polls will narrow? That's what usually happens, isn't it? And what can we expect is going to be said by the Prime Minister and the Conservative Party to try and win over some of that support? That 20-point poll difference with the Labour Party, as Beth Rigby was telling us, is huge. And if they're going to reverse that, that would be a record amount of turnaround in the polls to then try and win.
Yeah, look, let's not kid ourselves about the incredibly large and uphill battle that the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister faces to, frankly, salvage something from this general election. I think the idea really that the Conservatives can win this next election is ridiculous. I think we're ultimately now looking at, can they deprive Labour of a majority? And even then, I think that requires something of a miracle. It's probably going to require, yes, the public having a very, very different perception of the Conservative Party and of Rishi Sunak than they have at the moment. And there is only likely 6 weeks to turn that around. But they would also probably require something of an implosion from the Labour Party. There is some ambivalence towards the Labour Party, but it is nowhere near as strong as the dislike of the Conservative Party. So that ambivalence is going to have to turn into something significantly firmer if the government are able to turn this around. And frankly, going now really does limit the policy options that they have available to them. It really is uphill, and they don't have a lot of scope, a lot of wiggle room really to change things at this point, which may mean that the polls don't narrow perhaps as much as they have done in previous general election campaigns.
Yeah, but I suppose once we get into the campaign, it's always hard to rule out something happening during the process. I'm thinking back to the Gillian Duffy moment back with Gordon Brown in 2010. That how much impact it actually had, but that was a moment, wasn't it? And many people thought that was it. That was what was enough to have sunk Gordon Brown in the final few days of that campaign. Give us a thought, Chris, if you can, about some of the smaller parties and the impact they could have. Beth was just thinking there about reform and how they could be a challenge to Labour in some of the seats where they really feel quite confident, but there are likely to be some candidates put up that will make the war in Gaza their key focus. Sorry, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think just quickly on campaign effect. Campaigns can have a massive impact, and I think you're right to mention the Gillian Duffy moment. But equally, it happened in 2017 with Theresa May and the granny tax, and there is nothing to say that any major campaign moment won't just negatively impact the Labour Party. I don't think Rishi Sunak is a particularly good campaigner. I don't think he's particularly great in terms of some of his media appearances, and therefore I think he's just as likely to have a campaign gaffe as the Labour Party and Keir Starmer. I think on some of those minor parties, I think Reform UK really are the key. We've heard from Richard Tice that they plan to stand in every single constituency. If they do that, they will predominantly take votes away from the Conservative Party, and that opens up other seats to the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats that may otherwise have not been on offer to them. I think that Gaza will be an issue, but I think
Chris, Chris, sorry to interrupt you. We're going to go back to Downing Street, but thank you very much for that, Chris Hopkins. Let's take you back to Downing Street, where our political editor, Beth Rigby, is standing by. So, Beth Rigby, it's on for the 4th of July.
Yes, we are now expecting a general election to be announced imminently, and I can tell you, breaking news, we are expecting the Prime Minister to come out and make a statement in the street imminently. Let me just check what I've got. We're expecting the Prime Minister to come out and make a statement at 5 p.m. This evening. So just in 15 minutes, breaking news, the Prime Minister is going to be making a statement from Downing Street. We are expecting him to announce a general election July the 4th.
Quite the moment, Beth, and look, we've been thinking today as to why it would be this moment now that Rishi Sunak has decided to go for it. He always said it was going to be in the second half of the year. I guess the 4th of July is just the second half of the year, isn't it, once we get into July. But many of the promises or pledges that he had made have not been completely fulfilled. And let's not forget, there is a 20-point poll difference at this point between the Conservative and the Labour Party.
That's right, but he has decided to fire the gun on a summer election. It has been the rumour mill of Westminster for weeks. Does he go in July? Does he go in the autumn? But he has taken the decision, as we understand it. Sources telling us it's going to be a summer election. It's going to be July the 4th, as we understand it. And there has been two schools of thought within the Prime Minister's team. Does he wait for the economy to tick up more, to show people the plan is working, or does he hit the gas and go early? And I guess the calculation is, what have we had? Inflation numbers down to the lowest level since 2021. The IMF upgrading growth forecasts for the UK. That international body itself saying the economy's turned the corner. The UK out of recession. The Rwanda plan, the planes are going to be in the air. I mean, it is true that there have been record boat crossings this year, but still, that is a pledge plan and a set of pledges that the Prime Minister thinks he can try to sell to the electorate. And for Keir Starmer, what are his 6 pledges? Let me see if I can remember them. Economic stability, safer streets, set up British green energy, 6,500 more teachers, the new border force. That's his answer to the Prime Minister's Rwanda plan on illegal migration, and 6,500 more teachers in British schools. So that's the 6 pledges that Keir Starmer has put on a pledge card. And the Prime Minister, he will run this election on economy. You're safer under a Rishi Sunak government, and that will be around the issue of national security. You remember he went to Poland and then Berlin to announce that he was increasing defence spending. If he won the next election, that he would increase it to 2.5% by 2030, and he challenged Labour to do the same. Keir Starmer, for his part, has said he will do that when conditions allow. So it will be an election fought on economy, defence, migration. For Labour, they will be pushing hard on NHS, public services, economy, and of course law and order, where Keir Starmer, the former Director of Public Prosecutions, feels pretty confident on that sort of territory.
Yeah, Beth, look, you've actually had the fortune, let's call it that, to speak to both of these guys in the past couple of weeks, a couple of times as well, haven't you? You've seen them, and you know, every time you've spoken to them, you've been able to ask them this question about the election, certainly Rishi Sunak deflecting. What sense did you get from either of them, man, when you were actually speaking to them and looking them in the eye about the election, about how it was going to be fought? I mean, let's do the Labour Party first. You spoke to Sir Keir Starmer not long ago. We know that you had that sort of campaign launch last week where he launched those 6 pledges for the first steps of a Labour government. What sense did you get from him as to how ready he feels for this election campaign? Because, of course, election campaigns are quite the moment, and it's as much as you can win it as you can lose it.
Look, Labour have been pushing for an election for months now, and the Conservative Party and people in Number 10 actually repeatedly kept saying to us it's Labour that are stoking these rumours, trying to bounce the Prime Minister into a May election. Labour don't want to wait. Labour will be delighted that there is a July election. Why? For Keir Starmer, he's 20 points behind in the polls, and there's an expectation. In most elections, the polls do narrow, and he did not want to have to wait months and months and months in order to try and potentially see that poll lead, or try and hold that poll lead, as he potentially saw it being chipped away. So Labour are ready to go, and I imagine that they will be pleased that the Prime Minister is going earlier than perhaps was expected. Many Conservative MPs do not want an early election. They just think it's simply not winnable from so far behind. But as I was saying, Rishi Sunak clearly thinks that he's got enough in the tank to really try and put his foot on the accelerator and try and bring some voters back into his fold. I have to say, though, when I was on the trip with him in the summer, just a few weeks ago, he was a Prime Minister I thought that was really enjoying the job. He felt clearly that it was meaningful, that he was able to give that £500 million of aid to Ukraine. He talked very cogently about the authoritarian axis of states that would do us ill, such as Russia, Iran, China. He seemed like a man actually that wanted to stay in the job, which was, as a political editor, it made me think that maybe he would go long, that he would wait to the autumn, that he was enjoying being Prime Minister, that he didn't want to give up the job if it so happens that he does lose that election. But he's clearly changed his mind. We're going to be hearing from him imminently, 5 p.m. from Downing Street.
Indeed. All right, Beth Rigby, our political editor on Downing Street. Plenty more from you this afternoon and evening. Beth, thank you for that. So Sky News understands a general election to be held on the 4th of July. As Beth said, we're expecting to hear from the Prime Minister at 5 o'clock. Let me hand you over now to Mark Austin.
Good evening then from Westminster on a big night in British politics, and Rishi Sunak is about to make a statement in Downing Street calling a general election for July the 4th. A cabinet meeting has been going on behind that door there, where the Prime Minister is reported to have informed his ministers of the plan. Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates is with me. So, Sam, he's going for July, it seems. First question, why?
So Rishi Sunak is gambling his political career on a bold, surprising, audacious move to put his premiership on a line at a point where he is 20 points behind in the poll of polls, at a point where there is turbulence inside the Conservative Party, much grumbling even over the emerging news of this decision, and at a point where he cannot say that he has fulfilled most of his pledges that he made to the British people at the beginning of last year. And so this is an extraordinary moment where the Prime Minister is seeking to take back control of the agenda, frankly having lost it for most of the year, and by using the element of surprise, by using a smidgen of good economic news. We've finally got inflation back to 2.3% within the kind of normal margins of the 2% target that the Bank of England sets. We are now back out of recession and into growth. You can use that smidgen of better economic news after a huge period of economic and political turbulence to say to the country, things can only get better from here. The question mark is, will the public believe him?
So, a gamble. Obviously a gamble.
An enormous gamble. For some, this will be a moment where Rishi Sunak is sort of putting his premiership, looks like he's putting his premiership out of its misery. There are members of the cabinet that do not think he will be Prime Minister after this election. There are many, many members of his own party who do not think that he will be Prime Minister after this election. But some around him believe that there is the tiniest path that exists to an upset, a surprise, perhaps not even a majority, because that's what it would take for him to hang on in power. But something surprising could happen in the next few weeks, perhaps because Labour get tested, and there's a feeling in Conservative circles that when Labour's tested on policy, it crumbles a bit, and that could shake the polls. There is turmoil inside the Labour Party and Labour movement and traditional Labour voters over the party's stance on what's happening in the Middle East and on Gaza. That's been difficult for Keir Starmer. For a long time now, it's looked like Rishi Sunak has been waiting for something to come along to try and improve his political fortunes. Now, tonight, it appears that that thing that he's decided to wait for is the general election campaign itself.
So his gamble is he thinks there will not be a better moment.
That's right. And I have to say, Mark, if you just look at the turbulence of this year, you've got to think that there's a fighting chance that he's right, because we have had defections to the Labour Party and to Reform. We have had resignations, I think in the last few months, of Suella Braverman. We have had plots, people who were literally working for Rishi Sunak inside Downing Street now trying to oust the Prime Minister. We have got leadership contenders lining up. We've got, quite frankly, what has felt a bit like the stench of death. And Rishi Sunak inherited this incredibly troubled party when he became the third Prime Minister in this Parliament. And that party hasn't really ever cut him a break. And that's why I think there is a plausible case that if they wait longer, then it could get worse. And therefore, there is just this little window in the summer that they've decided to go for, which is, after all, in the second half of the year, just by a matter of days on July the 4th.
Pretty rare, though. I mean, I said, what, July election, I'm just looking here, 1945
Yes.
was and the Tories lost, incidentally, but very rare.
Very rare. Think of recent surprise elections. Now, the most recent properly surprising election was the one that Theresa May called in 2017. Really, she needed to get her Brexit deal done, didn't think she could do it with the majority that she had, was a long way ahead in the polls, rolled the dice, and ended up coming out wounded with a hung parliament. So it is fair to say that there are surprising consequences of surprising elections. I don't think anyone who turned up to work on that day in 2017, and I remember it well, thought that there was going to be a general election by the end of the day. And I think that sense of surprise is one of the few things that those in Downing Street will be clinging on to might emerge in this election campaign. OK, Sam, thanks very much. We're expecting Rishi Sunak to speak in a few minutes' time from Downing Street, where this evening we can join Sophie Ridge.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome to a very rainy Downing Street, where you can see me and Beth Rigby, our political editor.
A bit wet.
A little bit wet, but we are standing by for what we are expecting to be the big announcement from Rishi Sunak. Things are already starting to feel like they're on the move here, aren't they, Beth?
Yeah, some of his team are standing outside. Some speakers have been brought out. I think the cables have been brought out. I think, as we understand it at the moment, he's going to make the statement from within Downing Street because of the rain. You do not want to be announcing an election and be rained on. But yeah, it's quite a moment, isn't it? We've been talking for months about whether it would be an autumn or summer election. I know that they have been weighing it up in Downing Street. Last week I was told that the Prime Minister had the civil service in and he was going through the various options about the timings, about if he called a July election, when would be the last date. This was one of them, and it looks like he's actually going to go in the summer and not wait to autumn. There's a big division in his cabinet and the government about when to go, but the decision is his and his alone.
Yeah, it really feels that way, doesn't it? And I have to say, it's been a day where it's been building. There was rumours, this morning, a couple of people saying, hang on, what's going on? There's been a bit of kind of flutter about it, but, this is not our first rodeo. We've been here before, haven't we, Beth? But then it started to build with, of course, the trip by David Cameron cut short, the trip by Grant Shapps curtailed as well. Jeremy Hunt's interview with ITV cancelled, our interview cancelled this afternoon with another Treasury Minister, and now, of course, we are hearing, aren't we, that it is going to happen. Rishi Sunak is going to be, we understand, calling this summer election. It's a gamble.
Yeah, and I have to say, it's a gamble, and also just going back to the rumour mill, I have to say it has been excruciating the past few weeks, because there would be rumours coming up and we'd have to go and try and stand them up or stand them down. And what changed and made me quite nervous this afternoon was people I would typically expect to quietly just march me down the hill did not do that, which is what began to make me think, wow, is he really going to do it?
I remember this morning asking you, Beth, I was like, what do you think? What's your call on this? And Beth literally just read out a message from someone saying, hang on, that's not a denial, and they normally do deny to me. What's going on here? It does feel, doesn't it, that things are on the move. It is now 5 o'clock right now, so this is a time when we are expecting any moment to be hearing from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, calling, we think, an early election, that snap summer poll, which would be in July. That's the date that everyone's talking about, early July, first week of July, maybe hoping for a bit of a Euros bounce in the polls, perhaps.
Yeah, I also think, look, there's Oliver Dowden, apparently, the Deputy Prime Minister, has been really keen for him to go now, because they feel like they have some momentum. The Rwanda flights are going to get off the ground. They said July, but really they're planning for June. Inflation is down to its lowest level since 2021. The IMF has just upgraded growth forecasts. We're out of recession. So he's got some things that he can sell on the doorstep there. And of course, over the summer, the NHS waiting list could worsen, the boat crossings could increase. Yeah. So he's deciding to go now. But my goodness, it's a gamble. He is 20 points behind in the polls. And to put it into context, I was checking with one of our election experts, Isla Glaser, back at work, and I said to her, is this a record breaker if this Prime Minister comes back from that sort of deficit? And she said, no sitting Prime Minister has ever come back from a 20-point deficit in the polls 6 months out or less from a general election to go on to win. It would be 5 Conservative wins on the bounce. That's never happened in modern times either, if he got it. So it just gives you a sense of the scale of the task. But also, Sophie, if you think about going back to 2019 and then when Keir Starmer became Labour leader in 2020 and talked about a mountain to climb, and it looked like there would be a 2-term Boris government given that 80-plus seat majority, how events have changed in the past parliamentary term, that now it looks like it's the Prime Minister and the Conservatives that have that mountain to climb, to hold on.
I was thinking today, because you're right, the poll deficit, it feels like it would be madness to call an election now, but in some ways it could be that this is the best it's going to get, as you were saying, Beth, because yes, they do have, for example, the good inflation figures today to talk about. They also have the thought that they have a flight to Rwanda, hopefully setting off soon. But if you have a summer of boat arrivals, the boats keep coming or increase, and then the deterrent isn't working, that is a very difficult pitch. I was thinking it's a little bit like, you know, when you ask your kids to tidy their bedroom and they just shove it all in a wardrobe and they say, look, my floor is completely clean. Well, someone's going to open that door in the autumn. Someone's going to open that door in the autumn. So it could be that actually the situation gets worse in the autumn, if that's when he was hoping to call the polls.
I do think, though, that for Labour, they will. If I was in Keir Starmer's head now, I would be pleased about this. They are so far ahead in the polls. They've got their plan. They've got their pledge card out. And when you're that far ahead in the polls and you expect the polls to narrow, you kind of want to get it done now before it gives time for a Conservative reboot, if you like. So actually, I think for Labour, who are clearly pushing for a May election, it is sooner rather than later. I'm sure we're going to hear from Keir Starmer actually about it.
And to be fair to Labour, it feels like they've been preparing for this for a while, haven't they? They've always said, people close to Keir Starmer, that they are preparing for an early election.
They've wanted an early election.
And you can see it actually by the way that they launched that. You know, I think it was the 6 first steps, wasn't it? You know, that is a party that is effectively ready to go.
Well, that was a general election. Yeah. That was a planned event for a general election campaign launch. So they were making a kind of a big plan. in case there was this May election. And then it really did look after the locals. The whole talk about the summer election was the Prime Minister wouldn't have an option because the risk was the party would try to oust him if the results were so bad. When it was clear that there would not be a day of reckoning from the parliamentary party for Rishi Sunak after the local elections, then really I think that the mindset of Westminster did move back to autumn, because the jeopardy of the local elections and what could happen, that fell away. And then, as I was saying, the Prime Minister was then on the trip to Poland and Berlin to announce defence spend, and he really looked like a Prime Minister that was very into the job, wanted to make a difference, felt he could make a difference when it came to relations with allies and material difference to Ukraine and their battle and war with Russia. And so it also looked to me like, oh no, this guy wants to play it long because he likes being Prime Minister, but he's decided to go. And it might be that the momentum of the change, the economy's turning the corner, stick with us, don't risk it with that lot. That will be the line. He thinks, well, I could do it now, I could do it in autumn, but I've got more variables in autumn that could make it harder for me.
If you're listening and you're like, what is that really annoying noise in the background? Well, what you can hear, just to fill you in, is, as is quite regular in Downing Street, there is a group of protesters at the gates of Downing Street where people are making their views about the Conservative Party very loudly known. You can probably hear what they're saying, but it's effectively Tories out. Beth, I'm interested to get a bit of a sense about the July election. It's quite unusual. I looked this up actually, and the last one was.
You're going to do my line. Yeah, go on.
Okay.
No, go on. Go on. I'll see if.
Go on, then, Beth. What is
no,
it?
I don't know. I haven't found it on my phone. So tell me.
Sorry. It's the last time that there was a July election was just after World War II.
Yes.
So it does give you a bit of a sense about how this is not really a usual time to call one, is it?
Good knowledge.
Thanks.
Yeah. Apparently, I didn't know it until someone sent it to me. The last UK general election was held on July the 5th. On July the 5th in 1945, when Attlee won with a majority of 147. Swing was 12 points.
So there you go. It's not a usual time.
It's not a usual time.
Autumn is a time that we're kind of used to, I guess, isn't it?
Or May.
Yeah, or May, exactly. But then it feels like perhaps it's got that, as Beth was saying, the time when a few things coming together, the Rwanda flight, the economic figures. I wonder as well, there has been a lot of speculation, hasn't there, from people like the IMF saying, look, the debt levels are so high that how is it possible for a tax giveaway in any autumn statement? And I wonder if that's swung the balance a bit as well.
I think
if they were going to do that and then launch an election off the back of a tax giveaway, that is one thing.
Look,
they don't have the wiggle room to do it.
You're absolutely right. There's a couple of things that have been going on in terms of the economy. One is the headroom. The headroom is basically what they've got to play with in terms of tax giveaways, or they can spend it on the NHS or public services instead. It doesn't look like the Chancellor, who was, I think, planning for that second fiscal event. He certainly wasn't ruling it out when I asked him at the budget, at the very least. It doesn't look like he has that manoeuvrability. The other thing is that while inflation is at its lowest level, I think since 2021, I think it might be April 2021, I'm not sure. It's still 2.3%. It's slightly higher than expectations. And then that has had a knock-on effect of people saying the Bank of England might not cut interest rates. So these were two elements that they economically were looking at in terms of the calculations. So look, I guess what we are discussing here has been played out behind closed doors, where you can weigh it up and you can see advantages and disadvantages for summer or the autumn. I mean, the other point about summer elections, and this is a campaigning point, is the nights are longer, it's lighter, it's sunnier, people are more likely to turn out to vote because it's not raining apart from today. But in all seriousness, like a December election, you can't go door knocking at night, you can't knock on people's strangers' doors after dark, for example. So in a way, people prefer either early autumn elections or summer, spring elections for practical reasons of campaigning as well.
It's exactly like you said, isn't it? This is probably exactly the kind of conversations that they've been having in number 10. And it's almost like a weighing scale. If you imagine, like, you know, taking the autumn tax giveaway away, then that could just tip the balance slightly. Inflation being, yes, coming down, but perhaps not to the extent. I'm going to just stop here because we can see behind us the lectern. He is going to brave the rain.
He's coming out.
Guys, this way.
There you go. Rishi Sunak, we are expecting to be in front of that lectern.
And Sophie, notice, this is how you know it's election. I learned this from Adam Bolton, the former political editor of Central Sky News. It does not have a prime ministerial crest on. So that is absolute proof he is calling a general election. There's no prime ministerial crest. So the rain has stopped, and they're bringing him out. Can we take the brolly down?
Should we risk it?
Well, I'm
You know what?
I'm so drenched, Sophie.
We're going to risk it. We're taking the umbrella down.
Yeah.
Things are getting serious
So
now.
there you go.
So there we have it. As Beth was saying, no prime ministerial crest on that lectern, and that is proof, if it were needed, that Rishi Sunak is going to be calling a July election. We expect a 2-minute warning. We are expecting the prime minister to be walking out of those doors in the next couple of minutes to address the nation and pull the trigger on the early election. It's a gamble, as Beth was saying.
It's a gamble.
20 points in the polls.
Yeah, and I'm just actually a former cabinet minister has just messaged me to say, because we were talking earlier, and they say I did tell you he wasn't enjoying life as the prime minister. So that was one former cabinet minister who also said to me they thought it was pure madness to call election now, so far behind in the polls. What might he say at that lectern, Sophie? We could play election bingo here, because I think we're going to have turning the corner.
Rwanda, I'll go for.
Rwanda, I said I'd stop the boats, I'm going to get the flights away.
Finish the job.
Finish the job, days are getting brighter, security, you're safer under a Conservative government, and I'm sure there might be a bit of untrustworthiness of Keir Starmer, which is another attack line that the Conservative Party like to put out. But I am sure that he will reference the inflation figures coming out of recession, the IMF forecast, to make the argument that we are turning the corner as a country. Do not risk your fortunes. Do not risk it with a Labour government. That's going to be the main message.
Wow, it's getting exciting now. It really is. We've got eyes on the election. We can see the lectern, and this is going to be the moment. As Beth was saying, we can really imagine what the Prime Minister is going to be saying. Effectively, his plan is beginning to work. Don't risk it with a Labour government. That is going to be the message from the Prime Minister. It is a big gamble. It's a big gamble.
It's a big gamble. And actually, we've just got this from the Liberal Democrats. We are fired up and ready to beat Conservative MPs across the country and get rid of this appalling and out-of-touch government. Ed Davey is on his way now to Gove's true blue Surrey seat. Cabinet ministers in former Conservative heartlands will be looking nervously over their shoulders at the Lib Dems. And I have to say as well, another seat under threat is that of Jeremy Hunt's.
Yeah.
And the Lib Dems own the local, control of the local council there, and they're going for that one too.
I have to say, I feel like the last election was in many ways the story of the red wall, and I have a sense that this election could be the story of the blue wall. How are the Conservatives going to fare in some of those seats, like Jeremy Hunt that you were talking about? Ed Davey's party, of course, hoping to pick up.
Yeah, I was saying this earlier to Kamali, Sophie. I think there's kind of, if I pluck them out of my head, he's coming out.
In the last 5 years, our country has fought through the most challenging times since the Second World War. As I stand here as your Prime Minister, I can't help but reflect that my first proper introduction to you was just over 4 years ago. I stood behind one of the podiums, upstairs in the building behind me. I told you that we faced a generation-defining moment and that we as a society would not be judged by some government action, but by the small acts of kindness that we showed one another. You met that challenge, and then some, and I have never been prouder to be British. And when I introduced the furlough scheme, I did so not because I saw a country simply in need of desperate help, albeit we were, but because I saw a country whose future hung in the balance. I could be bold and trust in the tens of millions of you at home that you would rise to the moment, or I could accept the inevitable, millions of job losses, and pick up the pieces. In truth, it was no choice at all. I have never and will never leave the people of this country to face the darkest of days alone. And you know that because you've seen it. As I did then, I will forever do everything in my power to provide you with the strongest possible protection I can. That is my promise to you. Because for so many of us, it's easy to forget the scale of what we've been through. We were hit by a pandemic that upended normal life. Who would have thought that the government would ever tell us how many times a day we could leave our homes? Then, just as we were recovering from COVID, war returned to Europe, with Putin's invasion of Ukraine sending your energy bills spiraling. I came to office, above all, to restore economic stability. Economic stability is the bedrock of any future success, whether that is rising wages and good jobs, investment in our public services, or the defense of the country. And because of our collective sacrifice and your hard work, we have reached 2 major milestones in delivering that stability, showing that when we work together, anything is possible. Our economy is now growing faster than anyone predicted, outpacing Germany, France, and the United States. And this morning it was confirmed that inflation is back to normal. This means that the pressure on prices will ease and mortgage rates will come down. This is proof that the plan and priorities I set out are working. I recognise that it has not always been easy. Some of you will only just be starting to feel the benefits, and for some, it might still be hard when you look at your bank balance. But this hard-earned economic stability was only ever meant to be the beginning. The question now is how and who do you trust to turn that foundation into a secure future for you, your family, and our country. Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July. This election will take place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it has been since the end of the Cold War. Putin's Russia is waging a brutal war in Ukraine and will not stop there if he succeeds. That war has also made it all too clear the risk to our energy security. In the Middle East, the forces of Islamist extremism threaten regional and ultimately global stability. These tensions are exploited by extremists who seek to undermine our values and divide our society here at home. China is looking to dominate the 21st century by stealing a lead in technology. And migration is being weaponized by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders. And these uncertain times call for a clear plan and bold action to chart a course to a secure future. You must choose in this election who has that plan, who is prepared to take the bold action necessary to secure a better future for our country and our children. Now, I cannot and will not claim that we have got everything right. No government should. But I am proud of what we have achieved together, the bold actions we have taken, and I'm confident about what we can do in the future. We've tackled inflation, controlled debt, cut workers' taxes, and increased the state pension by £900. We've reduced taxes on investment and seized the opportunities of Brexit to make this the best country in the world to grow a business. Put record amounts of funding into our NHS and ensured it is now training the doctors and nurses it needs in the decades to come. We've reformed education, and our children are now the best readers in the Western world. We prioritised energy security and your family finances over environmental dogma in our approach to net zero. We fully funded an increase in defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. We made a decision to invest more in local transport that you actually use, rather than endlessly plough more money into HS2. We set out a comprehensive plan to reform our welfare system, to make it fair for those who pay for it as well as those who need it. Immigration is finally coming down, and we are stopping the boats with our Rwanda partnership. And we will ensure that the next generation grows up smoke-free. I hope that my work since I became Prime Minister shows that we have a plan and are prepared to take bold action necessary for our country to flourish. Now, I've stuck with that plan and always been honest with you about what is needed, even when that's been difficult. Because I'm guided by doing what is right for our country, not what is easy. And I can't say the same thing for the Labour Party, because I don't know what they offer. And in truth, I don't think you know either. And that's because they have no plan. There is no bold action. And as a result, the future can only be uncertain with them. On the 5th of July, either Keir Starmer or I will be Prime Minister. He has shown time and time again that he will take the easy way out and do anything to get power. If he was happy to abandon all the promises he made to become Labour leader once he got the job, how can you know that he won't do exactly the same thing if he were to become Prime Minister? If you don't have the conviction to stick to anything you say, if you don't have the courage to tell people what you want to do, and if you don't have a plan, how can you possibly be trusted to lead our country, especially at this most uncertain of times? Over the next few weeks, I will fight for every vote. I will earn your trust, and I will prove to you that only a Conservative government led by me will not put our hard-earned economic stability at risk, can restore pride and confidence in our country, and with a clear plan and bold action, will deliver a secure future for you, your family, and our United Kingdom.
That was the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, calling a snap election for July the 4th. I have to say, not everything perhaps went to plan. He was absolutely drenched by the weather. He did it to the backing soundtrack of Things Can Only Get Better, which of course Tony Blair, I think, came to power with in 1997. But we got the outlines, didn't we, Beth, of the election campaign that the PM wants to run. His plan is working, Labour has no plan.
Yeah, I mean, it was, as we expected, calling an election, saying it will be on July the 4th, that now is the moment for the British people to choose its future. He said that we could either, to quote the Prime Minister, build on the progress of his administration or go back to square one. Again, lines we have heard often, Sophie. He then moved into the issue of defence, saying that the world now is more dangerous than at the end of the Cold War, that there is risk to energy security, and in uncertain times, who has the plan to execute a better future? His argument was, I am the man that can do this. He did also acknowledge, though, some of the malaise under the Conservative successive administrations. He said, we haven't got everything right, but I am proud of what we can achieve together. And that, of course, an acknowledgement of what happened under the Truss administration, Boris Johnson, the way in which the Conservative majority of 2019 has been whittled back again and again in successive by-elections, the local elections, the worst performance of any Conservative party in decades. He went on to say, we have a plan, and again, I'm guided for doing what is right, not easy. That is another line I hear from him quite often. He then moved into the attacks, as we were talking about, on Keir Starmer. He said, you can't say that Labour has a plan. I don't know what they offer, and they have no plan. They would obviously contest that strongly. And he said, referencing the issue of Keir Starmer's pledges when he became Labour leader, something I asked him about actually at that election launch last week. I knew it was going to be a Conservative attack line, and the Prime Minister rolled it out in Downing Street, saying that Keir Starmer has shown he will take the easy way out. He abandoned all promises when he was when he was trying to be Labour leader to get the job. How do we know he won't do the same? He said, I will fight for every vote and earn your trust. So there you go. He's fired the starting gun. It will be a July the 4th general election. We haven't had one of those since the end of the Second World War in 1945.
And here we go. We've got an election, haven't we? The campaign has effectively started. Cancel your holidays, get your trainers on, because we're going to be running around the country following these guys. And I know, look, there's going to be lots of weeks of analysing the policy, but can I just... It is pretty apocalyptic here.
I know.
And
actually,
I have to say, Beth's literally just rescuing her handbag,
it's not that
which is basically filling up with water.
My laptop is literally...
And I have to say, that image of him at the lectern, raining down on him, and then stepping away and his back turning to us and going through the door, and the back of his suit jacket is drenched. I mean, that is, I'll be honest, it's not the image they're going to want. Frivolous though it sounds, to start an election campaign.
I have to say, the optics of this, I remember when he did a speech on extremism, and it was a last-minute thing in Downing Street again, and it started raining, and even when we were talking about calling a general election today, I did sort of say to some of our colleagues, the optics of a Prime Minister being rained on as he calls this general election is not ideal optics, which is why I thought he might actually do it in Downing Street. He decided not to. Maybe he could have had someone holding an umbrella. But anyway, he has called that general election.
And really, it's a gamble. We've said it before.
You ready for the election? Ready for the general election?
Are you
happy? Are you happy he's called an election?
All smiles there.
That's the cabinet coming out there. Who do we have? Claire Coutinho,
Victoria
Energy
Atkins,
Secretary, Health Secretary. They're going to be busy.
They're going to be ever so busy with that election campaign. They were very smiley, weren't they? But tight-lipped as well.
Tight-lipped.
And I have to say, we said it before, Beth, haven't we? But this is a huge gamble. He's 20 points behind in the polls. But I guess the calculation, when they're looking at the weighing scales of when to have the election, one of the biggest weapons in their arsenal, it feels like one of the critical things is they're just wondering whether things are going to get better, whether there is going to be a better time than now, if they don't have the giveaway in the autumn, for example.
And also, just to throw a curveball in a little bit, I mean, there is also questions about... some MPs are saying to me, I just got this through while he was talking actually, that they think that a lot of votes of confidence letters have been going in, that there hasn't been a single flight yet to Rwanda. This is a former minister saying to me, I said, do you think that they're calling it because he was worried about a confidence vote? This person saying yes. None of this seems as though he's in control. Suspect letters peaked, hence the chaotic nature of today, doing this on a wet Wednesday afternoon. That's just one thought from a couple of sources have put that to me. So
it's like Beth was saying, it is slightly. We've got the weather, we've got the music. You can probably hear it. There is an awful lot of music that is being projected. Always a risk in Downing Street, of course. But launching your election campaign to the sound of things can only get better. One Lib Dem source, cracking the joke that it should be things could only get wetter. I mean, it's not the greatest optics.
It's not the greatest optics, and I mean there is a problem here in Downing Street because people can go to the end of the street and play really loud music on really loud speakers, and there's actually very little. It's not a public offence, so very little that they can do about it. He could have called it inside, but obviously the world's press is here. And, whether or not he was going to face a confidence vote or not is rather a moot point now, isn't it? In the sense that we do know that there have been a live discussion in government about whether to go in the summer or later. It might be that there has been disquiet amongst the parliamentary party, but I should also say, we've been doing a lot of reporting and chasing and on this, that the idea that there was going to be a challenge to his leadership, that just melted away after the local elections. And actually, the other thing about that melting away was that there was a view that he needs to own the defeat if that is what comes. And if he had had a confidence vote, he would have won the confidence vote. But I guess that means you are very walking wounded going into either general election. Can you imagine? Can you imagine a live debate in which Keir Starmer said to the Prime Minister, "Well, if your own party don't back you, why should the country?" So the optics of that are just quite frankly dreadful.
It'd be very hard. So we've been talking about the speech, the optics, and also the decision and the gamble. Let's just take a step back, shall we, and talk a little bit about grounds the election is likely to be fought
Just
on?
before, I just got this from a former cabinet minister. What an awful speech and optics.
Cabinet minister?
About the rain and. But look, on the right, what were we talking about? It's
been a mad day.
We're going to talk about what the themes of the
what
election
the themes of the campaign. Because I feel like we got a few hints, didn't we, in the speech that Rishi Sunak
So
said.
I think we stopped talking about this because he came out. So should we do the policy themes and the political themes?
Yeah, let's go for
Which
policy
one do you want to
first.
go? Policy first.
Let's do it. We'll get right into the meat.
Yeah, let's. I think on the. I was saying earlier, Sophie, it's going to be an economy election.
Yeah.
If you look at the kind of pledges that both sides have made, the Prime Minister's 5 pledges, Keir Starmer's now 6, he added one in, it was migration, illegal migration. He added the border force in. It wasn't one of his 5 missions of government that he set out over a year ago. Why is that? Because illegal migration, NHS, are going to be 2 big themes. Both Prime Ministers have tried to make pledges on those policy areas, but it is going to be the economy election after a cost of living crisis, COVID, war in Ukraine. Finally, are you looking forward to the election? Can you win it? Can you win it?
Well, that was Richard Holden, the Conservative Party
chair. I
chair.
just saw him out my... And Isaac Levido, that was Isaac Levido there, who is the Prime Minister's campaign chief.
And there was a lot of speculation, wasn't there, that Isaac Levido wanted to have the later election, the autumn election, but perhaps other voices around Rishi Sunak.
I had heard that Isaac Levido, who used to work with Linton Crosby, and watchers of politics will know all about that man, because he was the guy that masterminded the Cameron win, wasn't it, back in 2010? Yeah. He worked with Theresa May, he worked with Cameron in 2015, he helped Boris out in 2019, Boris Johnson. And he really is, he's the guy that says you need to take the barnacles off the boat, and the other one is you can't fatten a pig on the way to market.
It's a straight talker, I think you could say.
But the reason I pick those 2 out, Sophie, is because it goes back to what we were talking about policy, which is you have very clear messaging on a small number of policies that you rinse and repeat again and again and again. And I think those 3 will be the economy election, really. And Labour are feeling quite confident on that, because Labour have never been as trusted on the economy in polling as the Conservatives. But the Liz Truss debacle, that mini budget, has actually given them a window now in which they feel that they can fight the Conservatives. And in a way, Sophie, the fact that they actually diluted their economy pledge in their, from the mission was the fastest growing economy in the G7, it got downgraded to delivering economic stability, is because they think that actually promising that it won't be a car crash economic mini budget is enough to satisfy voters. We can do the politics as well if you want.
Let's do it in a minute.
So
but you know what? No, we've got loads of time, Beth, don't worry. But I was just thinking maybe before we get on to that, we should actually listen back to what the Prime Minister had to say. Because if you are just joining us, if you missed the big moment, well, Rishi Sunak's taken the gamble of his life. He's decided to call an election for July the 4th. And let's have a little listen, shall we, to what he had to say.
Our country has fought through the most challenging times since the Second World War. As I stand here as your Prime Minister, I can't help but reflect that my first proper introduction to you was just over 4 years ago. I stood behind one of the podiums, upstairs in the building behind me. I told you that we faced a generation-defining moment, and that we as a society would not be judged by some government action, but by the small acts of kindness that we showed one another. You met that challenge, and then some, and I have never been prouder to be British. And when I introduced the furlough scheme, I did so not because I saw a country simply in need of desperate help, albeit we were, but because I saw a country whose future hung in the balance. I could be bold and trust in the tens of millions of you at home that you would rise to the moment, or I could accept the inevitable, millions of job losses, and pick up the pieces. In truth, it was no choice at all. I have never and will never leave the people of this country to face the darkest of days alone. And you know that because you've seen it. As I did then, I will forever do everything in my power to provide you with the strongest possible protection I can. That is my promise to you. Because for so many of us, it's easy to forget the scale of what we've been through. We were hit by a pandemic that upended normal life. Who would have thought that the government would ever tell us how many times a day we could leave our homes? Then, just as we were recovering from COVID, war returned to Europe, with Putin's invasion of Ukraine sending your energy bills spiraling. I came to office, above all, to restore economic stability. Economic stability is the bedrock of any future success, whether that is rising wages and good jobs, investment in our public services, or the defence of the country. And because of our collective sacrifice and your hard work, we have reached 2 major milestones in delivering that stability, showing that when we work together, anything is possible. Our economy is now growing faster than anyone predicted, outpacing Germany, France, and the United States. And this morning it was confirmed that inflation is back to normal. This means that the pressure on prices will ease and mortgage rates will come down. This is proof that the plan and priorities I set out are working. I recognise that it has not always been easy. Some of you will only just be starting to feel the benefits, and for some, it might still be hard when you look at your bank balance. But this hard-earned economic stability was only ever meant to be the beginning. The question now is how, and who do you trust to turn that foundation into a secure future for you, your family, and our country? Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July. This election will take place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it has been since the end of the Cold War. Putin's Russia is waging a brutal war in Ukraine and will not stop there if he succeeds. That war has also made it all too clear the risk to our energy security. In the Middle East, the forces of Islamist extremism threaten regional and ultimately global stability. These tensions are exploited by extremists who seek to undermine our values and divide our society here at home. China is looking to dominate the 21st century by stealing a lead in technology. And migration is being weaponized by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders. And these uncertain times call for a clear plan and bold action to chart a course to a secure future. You must choose in this election who has that plan, who is prepared to take the bold action necessary to secure a better future for our country and our children. Now, I cannot and will not claim that we have got everything right. No government should. But I am proud of what we have achieved together, the bold actions we have taken, and I'm confident about what we can do in the future. We've tackled inflation, controlled debt, cut workers' taxes, and increased the state pension by £900. We've reduced taxes on investment and seized the opportunities of Brexit to make this the best country in the world to grow a business. Put record amounts of funding into our NHS and ensured it is now training the doctors and nurses it needs in the decades to come. We've reformed education, and our children are now the best readers in the Western world. We prioritised energy security and your family finances over environmental dogma in our approach to net zero. We fully funded an increase in defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. We made a decision to invest more in local transport that you actually use, rather than endlessly plough more money into HS2. We set out a comprehensive plan to reform our welfare system, to make it fair for those who pay for it as well as those who need it. Immigration is finally coming down, and we are stopping the boats with our Rwanda partnership. And we will ensure that the next generation grows up smoke-free. I hope that my work since I became Prime Minister shows that we have a plan and are prepared to take bold action necessary for our country to flourish. Now, I've stuck with that plan and always been honest with you about what is needed, even when that's been difficult. Because I'm guided by doing what is right for our country, not what is easy. Now, I can't say the same thing for the Labour Party, because I don't know what they offer. And in truth, I don't think you know either. And that's because they have no plan. There is no bold action. And as a result, the future can only be uncertain with them. On the 5th of July, either Keir Starmer or I will be Prime Minister. He has shown time and time again that he will take the easy way out and do anything to get power. If he was happy to abandon all the promises he made to become Labour leader once he got the job, how can you know that he won't do exactly the same thing if he were to become Prime Minister? If you don't have the conviction to stick to anything you say, if you don't have the courage to tell people what you want to do, and if you don't have a plan, how can you possibly be trusted to lead our country, especially at this most uncertain of times? Over the next few weeks, I will fight for every vote. I will earn your trust, and I will prove to you that only a Conservative government led by me will not put our hard-earned economic stability at risk, can restore pride and confidence in our country, and with a clear plan and bold action, will deliver a secure future for you, your family, and our United Kingdom.
Well, there you go. Rishi Sunak braving the weather to give a speech at the lectern at Downing Street, calling a general election on the 4th of July. And really, we saw the outlines of the campaign, didn't we, being drawn. They've got a plan, according to Rishi Sunak. Keir Starmer doesn't. But we're expecting, I guess, to hear from Labour, aren't we?
We're going to hear from Keir Starmer imminently, and I just had this from one of his team. You'll see on the lectern when Keir Starmer speaks one word, change. That's our election message, and that really has been the message. They think that the momentum for change in the country is such that people will turn to the Labour Party. They think that, in a way, the specifics of the pledge card, in a way, it was quite vague. Tony Blair's was quite specific, but there is a view that actually the promise of change is enough to win voters over, and you are going to hear change, 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 change on repeat from Keir Starmer, even if in substantive policy terms, given the constraints of the public finances and given the way in which Rachel Reeves, his shadow chancellor, has really boxed Labour in terms of her own fiscal rules and ruling out tax rises in every which way. Even though in substantive policy terms you might not see lots of change in terms of policy, the politics will all be about change and turning the page, as he would put it, on 14 years of Conservative chaos, as he would put it.
Yeah, this is it, isn't it? We're only kind of an hour into the election campaign, if you like, and we're already seeing that, aren't we?
You know the lines, though, don't we?
You know the lines.
And it shows you that they have been running them out, you know?
Change with the Labour Party, and it feels like with Rishi Sunak, listening to what he said, my plan's working, stick with the plan, don't let Labour ruin it, is effectively what he's saying, isn't it? We're just moments away from hearing from Keir Starmer. And it's interesting, isn't it, Beth? Because as you were saying, look, one of the kind of ace cards from a Prime Minister is being able to call the date of the general election. Yeah. You can set the date. But Keir Starmer, you can see, Labour have been preparing for this,
They have been preparing for it.
We're expecting to see quite a slick speech from him potentially as well.
They have been preparing for it. As I said, the launch of the 6 First Step pledges last week was and effectively kicking off a general election campaign anyway. Keir Starmer was different in the delivery. He had his sleeves rolled up. He was sort of pacing around the stage in a way that I remember David Cameron doing
this
that.
too.
Do you remember
and
that?
Tony Blair as well.
Tony Blair, David Cameron did it back in 2015. He is a leader, I would say, and I have interviewed him a number of times, as I know you have, Sophie, that has grown in confidence. One of his former advisors said he wears his polls on his sleeves, as they have grown in confidence, and the poll lead has increased. It has given him momentum, and I think that West Mids win when they won the mayoral race by 1,500 votes, and he turned up at 9:30 in Birmingham, in the centre of the city, to attend a victory rally. That was, for me, a momentum-shifting moment for Labour.
Here he comes. Let's listen.
Thank you. Thank you. Tonight, the Prime Minister has finally announced the next general election, a moment the country needs and has been waiting for. and where, by the force of our democracy, power returns to you. A chance to change for the better your future, your community, your country. Now, it will feel like a long campaign, I'm sure of that. But no matter what else is said and done, that opportunity for change is what this election is about. Over the course of the last 4 years, we've changed the Labour Party, returned it once more to the service of working people. All we ask now, humbly, is to do exactly the same for our country and return Britain to the service of working people. To that purpose, we offer why you should change Britain with Labour. One, because we will stop the chaos. Look around our country. The sewage in our rivers, people waiting on trolleys in A&E, crime virtually unpunished, mortgages and food prices through the roof. It's all, every bit of it, a direct result of the Tory chaos in Westminster. Time and again, they pursue their own interests rather than tackling the issues that affect your family. And if they get another 5 years, they will feel entitled to carry on exactly as they are. Nothing will change. A vote for Labour is a vote for stability, economic and political. A politics that treads more lightly on all our lives. A vote to stop the chaos. Two, because it's time for change. Our offer is to reset both our economy and our politics so that they once again serve the interests of working people. We totally reject the Tory view that economic strength is somehow gifted from those at the top. Over the past 14 years, through all the crises we've had to face, sticking with that idea has left our country exposed, insecure, and unable to unlock the potential of every community. But a vote for Labour is a vote to turn the page on all that. A vote for change. And finally, three, because we have a long-term plan to rebuild Britain. A plan that is ready to go, fully costed and fully funded. We can deliver economic stability, cut the NHS waiting times, secure our borders with a new border security command, harness great British energy to cut your bills for good, tackle antisocial behaviour, and get the teachers we need in your children's classroom. But most importantly of all, we do all this with a new spirit of service. Country first, party second. A rejection of the gesture politics you will see in this campaign, I have no doubt, from the Tories and the SNP. I'm well aware of the cynicism people hold towards politicians at the moment. But I came into politics late, having served our country as leader of the Crown Prosecution Service. And I helped the police service in Northern Ireland to gain the consent of all communities. Service of our country is the reason and the only reason why I am standing here now asking for your vote. And I believe with patience, determination, and that commitment to service, there is so much pride and potential we can unlock across our country. So here it is, the future of the country in your hands. On the 4th of July, you have the choice. And together, we can stop the chaos, we can turn the page, we can start to rebuild Britain and change our country. Thank you.
Well, there you go. The Keir Starmer, the man who wants to be the Prime Minister, giving his reaction to the general election being called the backdrop to flags of the United Kingdom, and I think the message that he's trying to send out is pretty clear. He's trying to look prime ministerial. Beth, what did you make of what you had to say?
Well, it wasn't the optics of that, standing in what looks like effectively the number 10 press briefing room with the panelled walls, the flags at the lectern. He really is trying to portray himself as Prime Minister in waiting. And look, Sophie, I haven't done it myself. I'm sure someone clever back at base will. How many times have you mentioned change in that? A lot. It's time for change. This is a moment the country needs. It's time to change the country for better, changing your community, your country. He said over the past 4 years we have changed the Labour Party. That, he always said, was his first step, wasn't it? And now he said, we humbly ask what we would like to do now is do the same for the country. And then he went into why you should change the country with Labour rather than sticking with the Conservative. 3 themes there. One was stop the chaos. You will hear this time and time again, the Conservative chaos, 14 years of Conservative chaos. He winds that line up and out every Prime Minister's questions. He then said it's time for change to reset our economy and our politics. And there are the 2 themes that we've been talking about here, that it's economy and it's also about trust. And he wants to try and rebuild trust with voters, and he said it's time to turn the page, vote for change. As I was saying earlier, the trust issue is one that he is going to have to answer given what happened in the leadership.
The trust issue, as you say, something that Keir Starmer is going to have to answer. And I wonder if there's something else as well, because Rishi Sunak, when he gave the speech and was giving the attack lines, if you like, on Keir Starmer, the one thing that did stand out was when he said, look, I don't know what Keir Starmer stands for, you probably don't either, talking to viewers at home. They are going to have to give more detail, aren't they, about what a Keir Starmer Britain would look like?
I think there's a couple of things in that. I think number one, the fact that Keir Starmer presented a different type of leadership pitch when he was trying to win over the membership of the party and quite left-leaning party members to take over from Corbyn. And what he is offering now, they are 2 different prospects. And in this interview we did, he said, I had to adapt my many manifesto commitments for the Labour leadership race. And I said, you didn't adapt them, and you know this too.
Yeah.
You junked a lot of them. So I think that perhaps he does have to talk a bit more about the journey that took him from Director of the Crown Prosecution Service to being in Corbyn's cabinet and living with that, to going on to make promises as the Labour leader and now trying to be Prime Minister. I think it's a theme of the general election. It will be a political theme which the Tories will use to try to attack him.
I remember interviewing him during the Labour leadership contest and asking, who are you closer to, Jeremy Corbyn or Tony Blair? And he said, I'm not close, I wouldn't choose either of them. It's like, well, now, you know, you've expelled one person, you've stripped one person from the party, and Tony Blair is almost kind of hugging him quite close.
Yeah, I think...
So, you know, it does really feel that he has been on, as you say, a journey.
But I think also that what Labour will do in terms of the plan. So the Prime Minister says, I haven't got a plan. Keir Starmer in that speech says, we have a plan for change. He talked about a long-term plan and he outlined those 6 points. I think that he will have to talk more about what sort of Prime Minister he will be should he win this general election. We're going to get a lot of it in the next few weeks.
We really are. You're not going to get bored of it.
In.
Don't worry, strap in. We are going to be here for the whole ride, taking you through all of it. Here and lots of other places as well.
I think we're going to be all around the country, aren't we?
Get your umbrella ready. I do want to take you to Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, someone who's going to play a big role, I'm sure, in the general election campaign as well, because he's been speaking in Surrey, one of those areas where the Lib Dems are really hoping to make some strides.
Across the country, people are crying out for change, and this election is the chance to make that happen. In so many parts of the country, it's the Liberal Democrats who can beat the Conservatives, who've taken people for granted for so long. Every vote for the Liberal Democrats is a vote for a local champion, an MP who will fight for you, your family and your community to get the fair deal that you so deserve. This government is out of touch. It's out of excuses. And it's out of time. Yes. And it's time to get this Conservative government out of office. And if we do, we can transform our politics. We can sort out the crisis in the health and care system. We can get our economy back on track. We can end the sewage scandal. And we can get the fair deal people deserve. Thank you very much.
The Lib Dem leader speaking there. Well, there you have it. Buckle up. The election has been called. It is going to be on July the 4th. Clear your diaries. We've heard from Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer and Ed Davey. I want to bring in Mark Austin, who's standing by for us. Mark, what do you make of what we've seen?
Thanks very much indeed, Sophie. We feel a bit guilty in the dry here, I have to say. But as you say, we've heard from the key party leaders so far. Sam Coates, our deputy political editor, is with us. So is Ed Conway, our economics editor. Sam, first of all, how do you think the speeches that you've heard this evening set the tone for the campaign?
I think we learnt a lot just in the last hour. For Rishi Sunak, he wants to present the world as a dangerous place and Keir Starmer as not the safe steward that should be placed with the job of steering the country through the next few years. It was a doom-laden, quite gloomy speech as he stood there, drenched in the rain, to the backdrop of a Labour anthem, but painting domestic and foreign challenges as the big things facing the country and trying to make an optimistic case, but really at its core was an argument, don't risk it with a change. And then for Keir Starmer, his job was actually to look, although the slogan was change, to present himself as the stability candidate. For a vote for him, he claimed, was a vote for undoing some of the chaos and sort of seeking safety. He presents himself not as a threatening figure, but as somebody he wants to present as somebody you can trust. And he knows that Labour comes to the public with a long-term inheritance of questions about whether they can manage the public finances. And so safety and stability are at the forefront of his campaign. So change, but just not too much of it.
All right. Now, what comes next?
So there's going to be an explosion of politics in the next few hours and days. A number of things happen at pace. The first is that I think a lot of MPs who haven't already announced that they're standing down have a very important and difficult decision to make. We've already got over 100 MPs who have said that they are standing down, 65 Tories, 19 Labour and a handful of others. Other big names, including in the cabinet, need to decide whether or not they're going. I mean, we need to hear from Jeremy Hunt that he is going to stand in this election. Then legislation that's before Parliament has to get through or be ditched. And then we're into campaign period, manifesto launches, debates, 4-week campaign, and then polling day.
OK. Ed, the timing of all this. I mean, inflation coming down, interest rates coming down. What do you make of the timing?
Yeah, and as Sam was saying, you know, this is the kind of traditional stuff that if you're the kind of government you fight on, you know, it's about stability, it's about the world as a scary place, and it's about the economy. And the economy was riven through that speech from the Prime Minister, and doubtless he will be talking about it. We're out of recession. You know, that's one of the key things they were waiting for. Inflation is now down to normal level. So that's the news that we got this morning. So a lot of those things have been ticked off that I think they wanted to have to try and give people a sense of normality. You know, there's a couple of issues. First of all, you know, it doesn't look like, for instance, inflation is falling quite as far as everyone would have expected, and therefore, as a result, that final thing they were hoping for, the Bank of England cutting interest rates, that looked like it was a racing chance just earlier this morning before the inflation data came out. Possibility of that happening in June. Now it's basically off the table in June. So there's probably not going to be an interest rate cut before the election. That's quite significant. Secondly, it's just that question of, you know, when people look at this election, it's that old question from, I can't remember which US president, maybe it was Ronald Reagan, do you feel better off than you did 4 or 5 years ago. And in this case, there is no parliamentary period in history where people have seen their real disposable income squeezed as much as this one. That's what the Prime Minister's fighting against. He will say that was down to the pandemic, it was down to what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. For a lot of people, they are still finding it very painful. Even though inflation is back to normal levels, there's the legacy of the last few years that people are feeling in their pockets.
Yeah, but he's basically saying things are not going to get much better.
No, and he's saying there's going to be a threat under the Labour Party. He's saying, look at the public finances. They're starting to get better, which they kind of are. He's saying, look at the tax burden. We want to bring it down. But frankly, it's very high right now. All of these things, as Sam was saying, there's going to be an explosion of all these debates, which we've been talking about a little bit incrementally over the course of the last few weeks. It's coming back, and it's coming back in a big way.
OK. Ed, thanks very much indeed. Sam, thanks for the time being. So Rishi Sunak has taken the plunge. He is going for an election on July the 4th. Let's join Sophie Ridge in Downing Street.
It's 6 o'clock. I'm Sophie Ridge. We are live in Downing Street, where Rishi Sunak has braved the rain to have a speech at the lectern here, where he called an election for the 4th of July. He urged voters to stick with the Conservatives, saying that he was the one with the plan and not to risk it with a Keir Starmer government. Let's have a listen, shall we, to what the Prime Minister had to say just a short time ago.
In the last 5 years, our country has fought through the most challenging times since the Second World War. As I stand here as your Prime Minister, I can't help but reflect that my first proper introduction to you was just over 4 years ago. I stood behind one of the podiums, upstairs in the building behind me. I told you that we faced a generation-defining moment and that we as a society would not be judged by some government action, but by the small acts of kindness that we showed one another. You met that challenge, and then some, and I have never been prouder to be British. And when I introduced the furlough scheme, I did so not because I saw a country simply in need of desperate help, albeit we were, but because I saw a country whose future hung in the balance. I could be bold and trust in the tens of millions of you at home that you would rise to the moment, or I could accept the inevitable millions of job losses and pick up the pieces. In truth, it was no choice at all. I have never and will never leave the people of this country to face the darkest of days alone. And you know that because you've seen it. As I did then, I will forever do everything in my power to provide you with the strongest possible protection I can. That is my promise to you. Because for so many of us, it's easy to forget the scale of what we've been through. We were hit by a pandemic that upended normal life. Who would have thought that the government would ever tell us how many times a day we could leave our homes? Then, just as we were recovering from COVID, war returned to Europe, with Putin's invasion of Ukraine sending your energy bills spiraling. I came to office, above all, to restore economic stability. Economic stability is the bedrock of any future success, whether that is rising wages and good jobs, investment in our public services, or the defence of the country. And because of our collective sacrifice and your hard work, we have reached 2 major milestones in delivering that stability, showing that when we work together, anything is possible. Our economy is now growing faster than anyone predicted, outpacing Germany, France, and the United States. And this morning it was confirmed that inflation is back to normal. This means that the pressure on prices will ease and mortgage rates will come down. This is proof that the plan and priorities I set out are working. I recognise that it has not always been easy. Some of you will only just be starting to feel the benefits, and for some, it might still be hard when you look at your bank balance. But this hard-earned economic stability was only ever meant to be the beginning. The question now is how, and who do you trust to turn that foundation into a secure future for you, your family, and our country? Now is the moment for Britain to choose its future, to decide whether we want to build on the progress we have made or risk going back to square one with no plan and no certainty. Earlier today, I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament. The King has granted this request, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July. This election will take place at a time when the world is more dangerous than it has been since the end of the Cold War. Putin's Russia is waging a brutal war in Ukraine and will not stop there if he succeeds. That war has also made it all too clear the risk to our energy security. In the Middle East, the forces of Islamist extremism threaten regional and ultimately global stability. These tensions are exploited by extremists who seek to undermine our values and divide our society here at home. China is looking to dominate the 21st century by stealing a lead in technology. And migration is being weaponized by hostile states to threaten the integrity of our borders. And these uncertain times call for a clear plan and bold action to chart a course to a secure future. You must choose in this election who has that plan, who is prepared to take the bold action necessary to secure a better future for our country and our children. Now, I cannot and will not claim that we have got everything right. No government should. But I am proud of what we have achieved together, the bold actions we have taken, and I'm confident about what we can do in the future. We've tackled inflation, controlled debt, cut workers' taxes, and increased the state pension by £900. We've reduced taxes on investment and seized the opportunities of Brexit to make this the best country in the world to grow a business. Put record amounts of funding into our NHS and ensured it is now training the doctors and nurses it needs in the decades to come. We've reformed education, and our children are now the best readers in the Western world. We prioritised energy security and your family finances over environmental dogma in our approach to net zero. We fully funded an increase in defence spending to 2.5% of GDP. We made a decision to invest more in local transport that you actually use, rather than endlessly plough more money into HS2. We set out a comprehensive plan to reform our welfare system, to make it fair for those who pay for it as well as those who need it. Immigration is finally coming down, and we are stopping the boats with our Rwanda partnership. And we will ensure that the next generation grows up smoke-free. I hope that my work since I became Prime Minister shows that we have a plan and are prepared to take bold action necessary for our country to flourish. Now, I've stuck with that plan and always been honest with you about what is needed, even when that's been difficult. Because I'm guided by doing what is right for our country, not what is easy. Now, I can't say the same thing for the Labour Party, because I don't know what they offer. And in truth, I don't think you know either. And that's because they have no plan. There is no bold action. And as a result, the future can only be uncertain with them. On the 5th of July, either Keir Starmer or I will be Prime Minister. He has shown time and time again that he will take the easy way out and do anything to get power. If he was happy to abandon all the promises he made to become Labour leader once he got the job, how can you know that he won't do exactly the same thing if he were to become Prime Minister? If you don't have the conviction to stick to anything you say, if you don't have the courage to tell people what you want to do, and if you don't have a plan, how can you possibly be trusted to lead our country, especially at this most uncertain of times? Over the next few weeks, I will fight for every vote. I will earn your trust, and I will prove to you that only a Conservative government led by me will not put our hard-earned economic stability at risk, can restore pride and confidence in our country, and with a clear plan and bold action, will deliver a secure future for you, your family, and our United Kingdom.
There we are. That was this evening's big announcement from a drenched Rishi Sunak. And since then, we've had a statement from the King and Queen that says, following the Prime Minister's statement this afternoon calling a general election, the royal family will, in accordance with normal procedure, postpone engagements that may appear to divert attention or distract from the election campaign. Their Majesties send their sincere apologies to any of those who may be affected as a result. Let's bring in our royal correspondent, Laura Bundock, who joins me live from Buckingham Palace. And that statement there, I guess, expected. It is part of the protocol.
Yes, it certainly is. So any engagements that are planned in the future will now have to be assessed, carefully looked at and decided what happens with them. No official announcements on that, but we do understand that the D-Day plans will still go ahead. But as for any forthcoming engagements, like I say, we understand they're all being assessed and reviewed now. That is the norm. Look, a little earlier today at around 3:15, the Prime Minister came to Buckingham Palace for his weekly audience with the King. We understand that meeting between the two men lasted around 15 minutes. And it was during that meeting that the Prime Minister made the formal request to the King for the dissolution of Parliament. The King then granted that request. That is what has to legally happen now. It has to be a formal request made and granted by the monarch. But this didn't happen in the last 3 general elections because the Fixed Term Parliament Act, now that's been repealed. We're back to what were, in effect, the old rules, if you like. So it was just a 15-minute meeting between the King, between the Prime Minister, before the Prime Minister then headed back to number 10 for the Cabinet meeting. But yeah, in terms of what happens next with the King, there will undoubtedly be some changes to his diary. They will be looking at carefully assessing upcoming engagements to assess where they stand with those. They cannot get involved in politics at all, anything deemed to be perhaps slightly political, perhaps slightly diverting from any general election campaign will have to be altered. And we heard there that statement from the Palace issuing the apology on behalf of the King and Queen for any disruption it may cause to upcoming engagements.
OK, Laura, thanks very much indeed. Let's listen now to what the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, had to say in response to Rishi Sunak's statement.
Tonight, the Prime Minister has finally announced the next general election, a moment the country needs and has been waiting for, and where, by the force of our democracy, power returns to you. A chance to change for the better your future, your community, your country. Now, it will feel like a long campaign, I'm sure of that. But no matter what else is said and done, that opportunity for change is what this election is about. Over the course of the last 4 years, we've changed the Labour Party, returned it once more to the service of working people. All we ask now, humbly, is to do exactly the same for our country and return Britain to the service of working people. To that purpose, we offer 3 reasons why you should change Britain with Labour. 1, because we will stop the chaos. Look around our country. The sewage in our rivers, people waiting on trolleys in A&E, crime virtually unpunished, mortgages and food prices through the roof. It's all, every bit of it, a direct result of the Tory chaos in Westminster. Time and again, they pursue their own interests rather than tackling the issues that affect your family. And if they get another 5 years, they will feel entitled to carry on exactly as they are. Nothing will change. A vote for Labour is a vote for stability, economic and political. A politics that treads more lightly on all our lives. A vote to stop the chaos. 2, because it's time for change. Our offer is to reset both our economy and our politics so that they once again serve the interests of working people. We totally reject the Tory view that economic strength is somehow gifted from those at the top. Over the past 14 years, through all the crises we've had to face, sticking with that idea has left our country exposed, insecure, and unable to unlock the potential of every community. But a vote for Labour is a vote to turn the page on all that. A vote for change. And finally, 3, because we have a long-term plan to rebuild Britain. A plan that is ready to go, fully costed and fully funded. We can deliver economic stability, cut the NHS waiting times, secure our borders with a new border security command, harness great British energy to cut your bills for good, tackle antisocial behaviour, and get the teachers we need in your children's classroom. But most importantly of all, we do all this with a new spirit of service. Country first, party second. A rejection of the gesture politics you will see in this campaign, I have no doubt, from the Tories and the SNP. I'm well aware of the cynicism people hold towards politicians at the moment. But I came into politics late, having served our country as leader of the Crown Prosecution Service. And I helped the police service in Northern Ireland to gain the consent of all communities. Service of our country is the reason and the only reason why I am standing here now asking for your vote. And I believe with patience, determination, and that commitment to service, there is so much pride and potential we can unlock across our country. So here it is, the future of the country in your hands. On the 4th of July, you have the choice. And together, we can stop the chaos, we can turn the page, we can start to rebuild Britain and change our country. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. We've heard from the major leaders of the political parties here in Westminster. We are going to have a general election on the 4th of July, and we're already seeing the battle lines for that campaign drawn. I have to say, it's going to be a remarkable effort for Rishi Sunak if he's going to overturn a 20-point deficit in the polls, but it's a gamble that the Prime Minister is willing to make. Well, let's hear from the other side, shall we? Because we're joined now by the leader of Scottish Labour, that is Anna Sarwar. You must be pretty pleased about the general election news.
Look, absolutely. We are finally getting this general election that the public has been so desperate for, and the country is desperate for change. And after 14 years of Tory chaos and failure, we finally have an opportunity to deliver that change, but it's an opportunity we can't afford to miss. And that's why we will spend every moment between now and the 4th of July to earn people's trust, to earn their support, and to demonstrate here in Scotland and right across the UK that by only voting Labour can you get rid of the Tories, in our case in Scotland, maximise Scotland's influence and deliver that change we so desperately need. It's a campaign we have been determined and looking forward to and relishing, but we've now got to do the hard work to earn people's trust, earn their support. Not a single vote has been cast in any general election and so far, so we have to get out there and win their trust and earn it, and earn that victory so we can change our country for the better.
What happens in Scotland could be really significant in a general election. I don't think Labour's ever managed to win a majority without taking at least 40 seats in Scotland, or at least not since the 1950s. Is that the kind of target that you're looking at?
Well, Keir and I have always been clear that there is no route to a UK Labour government that doesn't go through Scotland. Of course, we have made huge strides in terms of changing our party here in Scotland as well as across the UK, demonstrating that the party is ready to be in the service of working people in every corner of our United Kingdom. But we've still got work to do, as I say, to win those seats here in Scotland and help contribute to that majority Labour government. And I relish that opportunity, and I make a direct plea to people in Scotland. I recognise why you've wanted to run a million miles away from this rotten Tory government. I recognise why many people have wanted to look at the escape route away from, the parachute away from this Tory government. There is no majority for independence, there is no majority for a referendum, but neither is there a majority for the status quo. But there is an overwhelming majority in Scotland for change. So I say directly to people, we don't care how you voted in the past. We want you to join us on this journey to deliver that change together.
I have to ask another thing, because it really struck me when I was listening to Rishi Sunak just behind me here, outside the number 10 door. He made a big thing about not knowing what Keir Starmer stands for, and he told viewers watching at home that if they're honest with themselves, they probably don't know what Keir Starmer stands for either. Is it time for the Labour Party to really start to flesh out now what a Labour government would look like? Because, let's be honest, it's going to be a big challenge, isn't it? Are you willing to put up taxes? Are you willing to cut spending? Or are you willing to increase borrowing? Which is it? It's your chance to be straight with people.
Well, first of all, I don't accept the premise of Rishi Sunak's political attack. We do know what Rishi Sunak stands for. He stands for economic incompetence. He stands for economic instability. He stands for culture wars that seeks to pit.
You know, I tell you what, this, in some ways,
we absolutely relish over the next 6 weeks. No, if you let me finish the sentence, Sophie, I actually relish the opportunity where people across this country will get a chance over the next 6 weeks to put Rishi Sunak on one side and Keir Starmer on the other, and they can see for themselves who offers change, who offers decency, integrity and values, and who wants to work for the public interest, not party interest. That's something we absolutely relish over the next 6 weeks.
It was a long sentence, but I'll let you have it, don't worry. What I was going to come in and say, though, is that it almost... Let me finish now, please. It almost proves my point, though. I say, what does Keir Starmer stand for? And you answer by telling me what Rishi Sunak stands for. That's a problem, isn't it?
No, I rejected Rishi Sunak's accusation about Keir Starmer. I'll tell you exactly what Keir Starmer stands for. He stands for public service and government being about the people, not about the party. He stands for honesty, decency and integrity, something we haven't seen from this Conservative government. He stands for standing with working people. That's why we will make work pay and deliver a new deal for working people. He stands for reforming our public services so they're fit for the future. That's why we'll cut NHS waiting lists and make our NHS fit for the future. He stands for realising the huge potential in our country, for example, around the climate opportunity and the renewables innovation. That's why we'll set up GB Energy that will be headquartered here in Scotland. He stands for change, and that's why I'm confident we can win this argument over the next 6 weeks.
He also stands for a Scotland that is going to remain part of the United Kingdom. Labour's been very clear on that. He said that he doesn't want to do any deals with the SNP. What's your pitch to people in Scotland who voted for independence, who may have voted for the SNP last time round, who quite like some things about Labour, but they disagree with you on the independence question?
Well, a few things within that. Firstly, in the last couple of general elections in particular, people in Scotland haven't believed that Labour could win, and therefore their vote has been about protest and sending a message to the Tories rather than trying to get rid of the Tories. This election is different. We have a genuine opportunity to get rid of this rotten Tory government, but that's only possible if people across the country, including here in Scotland, vote Labour. Secondly, what has driven many people towards independence has been that desire for change and not believing that the UK could change. We will demonstrate over the next 6 weeks how the UK can change and how we can make a UK Labour government work for every part of our country, and Keir Starmer would be a Prime Minister for every part of our country. And third, I think the politics has fundamentally changed in Scotland. There is now a real focus, not just on one failing government in Westminster, but actually Scotland is stuck with two failing governments, two dysfunctional, chaotic political parties who are putting their party interest before the public interest. And that's why, come in the next 6 weeks, we'll be campaigning on economic stability, on reforming and renewing our NHS and cutting down NHS waiting lists, on setting up GB Energy, headquartered here in Scotland, and making sure we're making work pay and delivering that new deal for working people, and maximising Scotland's influence. So Scotland's not a part of protest, but actually Scottish Labour MPs go to Westminster to help make decisions that deliver for people here in Scotland.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Anna. So I'm sure we're going to be speaking an awful lot in the coming weeks. Thank you.
I look forward to it.
Well, there we go. The starting gun has been fired. Cancel your holiday plans. Get the date in your diary. It is going to be the 4th of July, a general election. Are we going to see a change of government? Will voters go for Rishi Sunak with his pitch, saying that his plan is working, don't deviate from the plan now, or the change that Keir Starmer is trying to promise? It is going to be a fascinating campaign. The battle line's already drawn here in this very rainy Downing Street. I'm going to hand you back to Mark Austin, who's in the nice dry studio. Mark, it's starting to rain again. I'm going to have to get my umbrella out.
Yeah, get Beth to hold the umbrella for you, and we'll stay in the dry here. Sophie, thanks very much indeed. And joining me now is Rachel Sylvester of The Times and Anne McElvoy of Politico, more specifically host of the Power Play podcast. Welcome to you both. Rachel, I mean, did you see this coming?
No, I have to admit. I assumed they'd go until November, but I think he must have just thought there was no certainty that things were going to get better, and there was a huge possibility that things could get worse. You know, that there weren't going to be the interest rates that people were hoping for. They weren't going to be able to deliver huge tax cuts. Small boats might keep coming over the summer. So he decided to go for it. And the kind of cautious Mr. Sunak became the risk taker.
I guess.
Fascinating.
But will the voters see through that, though, do you think?
Well, it depends what you mean. I think you already saw the pictures there set out between the two candidates. It's time for a change versus better the devil you know. It's the age-old election campaign, isn't it? Starmer had one word on his podium, change. Sunak had the prime ministerial logo ripped from his podium, you know, quite symbolic there, under the rain. Keir Starmer in that dry, wood-panelled room with the Union Jacks flanking him. So you could see the shape of the campaign already being formed there.
And I guess whenever he decided to go, it would be considered a gamble, unless it was right at the last minute, I suppose. How big a gamble is this, do you think?
I think it is a gamble. I think, like Rachel, I probably thought they would wait a bit longer, wait till that reasonable economic news that they had and that constraint of inflation, and they can claim some decent kind of headwinds or anti-headwinds are better than it was previously in terms of the economy vis-a-vis other competitors in Europe. But frankly, that's quite thin gruel on which to launch a campaign from 20 points behind. And I felt when I was listening there, Mark, to Rishi Sunak, it was almost like he was giving a valedictory. You know, he was going through all these things that I tried to do. It hasn't been easy, but, you know, my goodness, we had the pandemic, and don't judge us harshly seemed to be the message. He then picked up pace and said, don't take that risk on Keir Starmer. The world is a very dangerous place. And that is where I think the campaign is going to go, that there are weaknesses for Labour. Their message, their solidity, if you like, is coming together on a lot of areas, whether it's on public spending, whether it's on priorities. The fact that a lot of senior shadow cabinet people have had other views in the past on things like the nuclear deterrent. It's a bit easier from the Prime Minister's position to say, you kind of know what you're going to get with us. Of course, if you're Labour, you're going to say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Because you've been chaotic for so many years now. OK, you may have just got that out of the way, but stop the chaos. You had sort of stopped the boats coming from Rishi Sunak, and you had to stop the chaos coming from Keir Starmer. I think it just depends who can shape that message more convincingly in the weeks ahead.
Rachel, do you think it will be won or lost on the economy, or are there other things in play, like, for instance, the boats? I mean, I suppose that the flights to Rwanda could be up and running, and it would be before, another number of boats come across as the weather improves.
I think in the end it's, do people feel better or worse off than they did 5, 10 years ago? And I think the problem for Rishi Sunak is that people don't, even though there was good economic news this morning with the inflation figures, people don't feel that in their pockets. And I've sat through a few focus groups in the last few months, and the thing that keeps coming through is when they're asked about Keir Starmer, they keep saying, well, the other lot can't do any worse than this lot. And there is that sort of sense that things aren't working in Britain at the moment. And people feel that I think in the end, people vote in quite an instinctive way. They don't necessarily look at manifestos or pledges or campaign slogans. They vote in their gut about, do they feel better off, and do they think it's time for a change?
But just to interject on your word, to add to what Rachel was saying, the inflation numbers may be down at 2.3%, but a lot of people are looking not just the last year, that's just last year. If you look back the last 2.5 years, it's 20%. And it's that, so for Rishi Sunak, he looks at that number and sees a good news story. Do other people? I think that's the question.
And I mean, and the other point is really, if it's, well, we can't do any worse, that is not a very powerful endorsement for Keir Starmer.
Well, I think you're right there. I think there is something a bit tentative. I thought Keir Starmer, being very authoritative, it felt very practiced. There's as many flags as you could fit into one television-sized shot there.
And inside.
I hope you noticed that inside, as everyone keeps their flag. So I think, he had prepared that moment. There is a solidity to Keir Starmer. You couldn't say, no, it's a bit of an unfair thing to say you're not exciting. I mean, that's in the eye of the beholder, but it isn't his natural brand. So I think where he will come under challenge is, yes, it's OK to say, well, well, we need a change, it's time for a change. But you also have to enthuse, and campaigns eat up your energy very quickly. And what you think you've got on paper that looks like a very solid argument, the lines you ran today, I think could get used up fairly quickly in the campaign. And I think we'll see a quite hard-edged Tory attack campaign. We saw a little bit of an edge of it there. And of course, the world outside is not getting any easier week by week, as you know, sitting here at Sky News. You know, it's often a diet of very bad and often unpredictable news. That would be then thrown to Labour to say, I thought the one really good point that Rishi Sunak made was when he said, that basically on the day after, one of us is going to be Prime Minister. What he was really saying is, are you sure that you can imagine Keir Starmer as your Prime Minister through thick and thin? And I know I've had a bit of a rough ride and you may not love me, but I thought that was still a challenge point that Keir Starmer needs to sort of emotionally answer.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel, is your sense that there's nothing much that can move the dial now significantly enough?
The dial can always be moved. You know, things can always happen. You never know. But I think the problem for the Conservatives is that their attack line that Keir Starmer is risky doesn't chime with how the voters feel. They may think he's boring and not exciting, and they may be unsure about what he's going to do, but he's deliberately created as small a possible target on his back by not fleshing out hugely risky policies or lots of proposals that people could be frightened about. So I think if Rishi Sunak goes for the sort of Project Fear, that may not work in the way it didn't when the Tories went for Tony Blair with that demonise campaign in 1997, because it doesn't quite chime with where people are.
OK, Rachel, and thank you both very much indeed. And Ed, I just want to pick up with what you were saying. These inflation figures, which came out this morning, which seems, as you were just saying, an awful long time ago now. I mean, how important do you think those numbers were in what he has done this evening?
Well, it's a really interesting question because, on the one hand, you know, they were clearly waiting for this moment. They wanted for the numbers to come down to, you know, everyone was expecting them to come down to a normal level. They've been up at crazy kind of high levels, you know, double digits for a period. They've been coming down. They were at 3.2% before. Now they've come down to 2.3%. And yes, I think the Prime Minister was probably looking for those numbers and hoping they were going to be near normal. The proviso is they weren't down as far as, you know, a lot of people had expected. And the upshot of that is when you look at what, you know, in the markets people are betting on for the Bank of England to do, because the final thing was, I think the Prime Minister was hoping that to be able to call an election and to have a chance of the Bank of England cutting interest rates just before. So you're not in recession anymore, inflation's down at normal levels, the Bank of England's cutting interest rates. Isn't this great, or at least in the circumstances great? The problem is the probability of that happening, so interest rates being cut in June, just kind of went out of the window when those inflation numbers came in. They were just a bit higher than anyone expected. So, you know, it's interesting. I think he was waiting for this, but it didn't give him quite the answer. It gave him half of the answer, but not the full answer, I think.
Well, here's a man who may be able to help us on this. The Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Bim Afalami, joins us. So how significant were these numbers this morning, the inflation numbers, in pushing Rishi Sunak to do what he's done?
Well, look, obviously, you know, the Prime Minister thought about it before today, but they were significant because what it did was it confirmed that the plans that we've had have come to fruition. The economy is turning a corner. We're at the point where we're at that inflection point where, yes, things have been very difficult over the last few years, but inflation is now near target. And the choice now for the country is, what future do you want? And do you want one that's lower taxes, higher growth with Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives? Or do you want higher borrowing, lower growth, high spend with Labour? And this gives us an opportunity to do that.
Or there's the point that Rachel Sylvester just mentioned in polling that they've done, saying, well, it can't get any worse. So, you know, we might as well go for Keir Starmer.
Well, look, I first entered Parliament in 2017, and it was the Theresa May landslide. Well, that wasn't, as the case was. And I'm sure you're covering it at the time, and I'm sure you were as well, Ed. I remember people in studios like this saying, well, how big's the Conservative majority going to be? Everybody assumed they knew the answer. And it didn't turn out to be the case. I think that what's clear from the Prime Minister's speech, what's clear from the economic data and what we've seen in the Treasury and is what is publicly known, is that the British economy has turned a corner and things are looking up. Now, we're not there yet. I was in the House earlier on today giving an update on the economy, and people were saying, look, my constituents, are not feeling that everything's fantastic. And they're right. Not everything is fantastic, but we're well on the way there.
So why not
and that's why we need to stick with the course that we've taken.
Why not wait a little bit longer and just let that bed in a bit more?
Well, look, there's never a good or a bad time to call an election. But at some point, you have to make a decision.
If the inflation numbers had been worse,
i.e. higher,
would he still have gone? Yeah, would he still have gone?
Well, I don't know, but I do think there was. I mean, I can say that internally at the Treasury, our economists had forecast that roughly this is what would have been the case. So I think that there was a broad understanding that this is where inflation was likely to be.
Were you surprised when you learnt?
Of course, because one's always surprised when one learns of when an election is called. But what I did know is that we had reached that moment of decision, and the decision was really now thrown over to the public. The Prime Minister's made one decision, and the public's got to make another.
How do other ministers and how do other backbenchers feel about the decision?
I've only spoken to a couple of people, and they think similarly to the way I feel, which is, look, we knew an election was coming. People are ready. They're good to go in their constituencies, with their teams, with their activists, with their councillors. People are ready, and we're up for the fight because we know, as the Prime Minister framed it, we know that we have had a really difficult time with COVID, war in Ukraine, various other things. We've steered the ship.
Yeah,
things are now about to get to the point where people are really starting to notice a big difference.
But it stayed at 20%. I mean, the gap has stayed stubbornly, resolutely at 20%.
Yeah, and as I without repeating the point about Theresa May's election, I remember the gap where Jeremy Corbyn was compared to Theresa May at that time had been very stable, and he was a long way behind. And not one person gave him a chance. And I'm not saying that the situation is analogous entirely. I'm just making the point that until elections are called, you don't really know.
Do you expect the cabinet that's fighting this election to be, the same one we have now, or do you think there are going to be changes? Will Jeremy Hunt still be the
the short answer is I do expect the cabinet to remain the same insofar as before the election. Obviously, if we win the election, then the Prime Minister may decide to make changes to the cabinet. And obviously, you wouldn't expect me to speculate on that if we win the election.
Does the Chancellor stick around?
Of course.
OK.
100%. He's going to stand in his seat. He's going to remain Chancellor. He's a great Chancellor. He's done a very good job.
Bim Afellami, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Indeed. Let's go back to Downing Street and Sophie Ridge.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Well, here we are on a very rainy, eventful day in Downing Street where the starting gun on the general election has been fired. Ali Fortescue is with me now. I'm going to let you into a bit of a secret because Ali's been on maternity leave and she's just come back for a day.
Day one.
And on day one of her being back, the general election's been called. So, yeah, welcome back, easing yourself back in.
I have to say, even when he was standing there and making it, I couldn't really believe what I was hearing. I came in to have a quiet easing in. But, I mean, I guess, the big question we're all asking is why has he done this now? And obviously, there's some good economic news. But as you were saying earlier, is this the best of what are going to be some bad moments ahead potentially? He won't have time to show if the Rwanda plan really is a deterrent. Maybe we will see the first flight heading off to Rwanda. But I guess what is the story of this election? The word we heard from Rishi Sunak a lot was trust. And I think they're probably going to want to zone in on Keir Starmer, the man. Can he be trusted? Did he flip-flop on what he said when he wanted to be leader of the Labour Party? And the word you heard there from Keir Starmer was change. He wants this to be the change election. Do you feel rich in your pocket? Has the last 13 years been turmoil? What do people think about Liz Truss? So that is what Keir Starmer's going to want to be focusing on. But I guess the other thing is, with elections, so often they end up being defined by unexpected events. I think we saw that with Theresa May, with the dementia tax, everything like that. So could something come in the next few weeks that changes the whole game? Ultimately, this is an election where Rishi Sunak has a mountain to climb. He has taken an enormous risk. He is 20 points behind in the polls. Is it going to pay off? I think at the moment, most people would say it is Keir Starmer to lose.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? I mean, a 20-poll deficit between the Conservatives and the Labour Party, it's really worth dwelling on that and thinking about just what a as you say, big mountain it is to overcome. It was interesting, wasn't it? As you were picking out, he was really trying to target Keir Starmer. Perhaps there is some hope within number 10 that people have not necessarily made their minds up about Keir Starmer. They're not sold on him as a man. It's more a vote rejecting the Conservative Party. And does that, do you think, give them a glimmer of hope?
Well, I think, Labour obviously are polling very well, but Keir Starmer hasn't got the kind of personal following that Tony Blair had, and obviously lots of comparisons are made. So it is right that he hasn't quite cut through the electorate in the same way. And is that issue of trust, pitching him as someone that sat on Jeremy Corbyn's front bench, is that something that is going to cut through with the public? I mean, he is still ahead in the polls, as you say. Worth saying, too, I have been hearing from quite a few Conservative MPs this afternoon. I think, obviously, this has taken a lot of people, including them, by surprise. One of them saying it's a nightmare, no loss, he's a bore, and that's about Rishi Sunak. So there are people on his own side, I think, that are kind of openly texting me and saying that I can read that out on air, that think that it's not going to go well for him.
It feels like it's going to be a very, very spicy election campaign. Ali, it's great to speak to you, as always. Thanks for coming on air on your first day. It's good to have you here. Well, it really does feel, doesn't it, that we're never sure exactly what part of the country is going to define an election. In many ways, it was the red wall that defined the election last time around. Could it be Scotland? Could it be the blue wall, the red wall? Could it be Wales? Let's go to Lisa Dowd, shall we, who is standing by for us in Cardiff. Lisa, how do you think things are going to go down in Wales?
Well, the calling of this general election couldn't come at a better time for Welsh Labour, who are in power here. The First Minister, Vaughan Gething, has had a challenging few weeks surrounding, first of all, a controversial donation of £200,000 to his leadership campaign. He's also had, that was part of the reason, actually, while a cooperation agreement fell through with Plaid Cymru, the Welsh nationalists, recently. He's also had to sack a junior minister as well for alleged leaks to the media. So he'll be pleased that the focus will be shifting to Westminster. He's already put out a video saying that a Labour government would work far better with Welsh Labour in delivering for the people of Wales. But there isn't a Prime Minister's questions that goes by, really, is there, without Rishi Sunak pointing to Welsh Labour's record here in Wales, pointing to the particularly long NHS waiting lists. The Conservatives here in Wales are very critical as well of the default 20-mile-an-hour speed limit that is in position here. They say that Labour's record in Wales should be a stark warning to the rest of the UK. They say Wales has the lowest employment in the UK and Wales has the worst education standards in the UK as well. It will also be the first election test for Plaid Cymru's new leader as well, Rhys Pureworth, who came to power following that damning report into his party's culture. Now, Plaid are saying that they are the only party that will put Wales first, that the Tories crash the economy, and that Labour take Wales for granted. I've been speaking to some of the people walking by here on the waterfront here in Cardiff, and people aren't shocked that an election has been called. They're not particularly pleased either, and nobody I spoke to had made their mind up as to who they will be voting for. They are electing 32 MPs here in Wales, down from 40 following boundary changes.
Thank you so much, Lisa Dowd, there, saying that so many people that she's spoken to haven't made their minds up on how they're going to vote. So it really does show, doesn't it, that all can change in these election campaigns. Well, I can barely believe it. There we are, waking up this morning thinking it was going to be another normal day in Westminster, but fast forward to now and we have the date of the general election, the 4th of July. Rishi Sunak in a very rainy Downing Street firing the starting gun on the campaign, and already the battle lines beginning to be drawn. Keir Starmer has come out saying they want to have change. That is what the country needs and deserves. Rishi Sunak saying that his plan is beginning to work. It's time to stick with him. Who is going to be the victor over the campaign? Well, we'll wait to see. There's going to be a lot of twists and turns to go. But I have to say, starting off with a 20-point deficit is not necessarily the optics or the situation that you'd want to be in at the beginning of this campaign. Right, let's go back to Mark Austin, shall we? Mark's got the short straw, the long straw. He's in the dry, which is always nice, I have to say, from this very rainy Downing Street. Mark, what have you got?
Yeah, long straw, Sophie, that's what I've got, the long straw. With me now is Aisha Hazarika, Labour peer, also former Tory cabinet minister David Gauke. Aisha, you just described yourself as a baffled baroness. And why so baffled? You've got your wish.
Well, I think look, the country is definitely crying out for change, but I think what this announcement has shown is just how bad Rishi Sunak is at politics. Everything about this announcement was just such a shambles. He was there in the pouring rain talking about brighter times. Somebody was belting out things can only get better with a boombox in the side. I mean, everything about this announcement was chaotic. And the thing that was especially chaotic is that he had sent a signal out to his own side that this election was not happening really till about October, November. So Conservative MPs, many whom fear they're going to lose their seats, at least had sort of psychological comfort. They planned for the summer, things to do with their family, almost how to sort of leave their constituencies with a bit of dignity, plans to sort of, how do you do that fight? Because how you leave power is as important as how you sort of gain power. And I think everyone has just been absolutely astounded by this announcement. I think it looks really weak, particularly on the day when these inflation figures came out, which is a good thing for the country. Wherever you are on the political spectrum, it is good that inflation has come down. And it's almost like there's a little bit of good news. He's panicking, he's mainly panicking over these small boats in the summer. And he's thrown everybody into disarray. He's not going to have a motivated team who are probably going to risk divorce with their partners as they basically have to completely rip up their summer plans.
David, is it so baffling? Is it panic? Is it chaotic? Is it all those things?
Well, it's certainly surprising. I mean, trying to get to grips with why he's done this, and there is an argument for saying if you're going to go early, go in May. Why would you fight the local elections, which are bad, and then go? Trying to get to grips as to why he's done this. Look, at one level, it's not about personal vanity. He's not waited around hoping to get his second anniversary in as Prime Minister, he's tried to assert some authority. But I do worry that people are going to look at this and think, has he kind of given up? Has he just lost the stomach for the fight? Is it because he fears that the summer is going to be difficult? As Aisha says, the small boats issue could be quite challenging for him. And I think to some extent he has really got to win the first few days of this campaign. I agree it didn't look good today, the announcement, but he has got to convince his own side that this isn't because he's given up, it's because he actually thinks this is his best chance to put the pressure on the Labour Party, present a choice to the country. There's no point in waiting. And I think at one foot, a foot just stepping back, probably for the country, avoiding a long, drawn-out election campaign with a lot of uncertainty. It's probably not good for business, creates a lot of uncertainty. So, ripping off the plaster, cracking on, I think at least we can be grateful to Rishi Sunak for that.
Aisha, Hazrika, I mean, it's looking good in the short term, coming down. IMF predicting that the UK economy as measured through GDP would be 8.8%, nearly 9% bigger by the end of 2029 at the start of this year. Can't say that about France, Germany, Italy, Japan. So he can make all those arguments early on in the campaign.
Sure, he can make those very important arguments, but to a lot of people, and of course Ed will be the expert on all of this, they feel very academic to people because that's not the lived reality of people's lives. People are not sitting back going, gosh, things are feeling marvellous at the moment. I spoke with Paul Johnson of the IFS today. Lots of people are remortgaging at this point. They're going to see their mortgages considerably jump up as a result of the tail end of the Liz Truss era and things like that. So I think what's interesting about this is I think he seized on the metrics and just got very excited about them, thinking that a grateful public will look at these bars and charts and the great graphs that Ed does and be like, amazing, we're ever so grateful, when actually people have had a really, really tough time over the last few years.
What do you think? I mean, will they be looking at the graphs and the detail? Or no, but yeah, you hope. Or will it just be a feeling?
Well, it's a feeling, but it depends on which graph. If you look at some of the graphs, it looks bleak. There has never been a parliament where you've seen as big a fall in living standards as the one that we are going through right now. Now, the government will say that's down to what's happened with the pandemic, it's down to what's happened in Ukraine, and they have a fair point about that. And frankly, a lot of Europe, like you say, is not doing as well as the UK right now.
But I think the other thing which is really important to say is that even with these two tax cuts that the chancellor has introduced over the last year or so, people out there have joined up the dots between tax cuts and what's happening with public services as well. And they are looking at everything in the round. They're not just looking at the money in their own pockets and purses at the moment and wallets. They're also smart enough to join up the dots and say, look, something is going very, very wrong right now. They're not buying the spin of these tax cuts.
But David, I mean, there is a rule of thumb that you go when your opponents least want to go. Is there anything in that at all here?
I think the big problem for Rishi Sunak and this decision is that there was no good answer. So he could have waited until November. I thought he was going to wait until November. I think most people thought he was going to wait until October, November. But the idea that the economy at that point, even if it had been good for a few more months, was going to transform the way people vote, I think is unlikely. Look at John Major. You know, he had a strong economy for 4 years, still didn't save the Conservatives in 1997. So, you know, whichever choice Rishi Sunak made, you know, he's probably heading for a defeat, and then he'll kind of get the blame, and people say you should have gone earlier or you should have gone later. He's probably going to get more blame now, unless he can really substantially reduce the election defeat.
What will MPs, backbenchers and ministers be thinking?
Well, I think a lot of them are going to be pretty furious, you know, for the reasons Aisha said. You know, they kind of made plans, their expectations have been built up. You know, people, I wouldn't be surprised if some of them were about to go on a half-term holiday in Whitsun. I certainly did that as an MP on many occasions. You're now having to sort of cancel that.
Yes.
As well as the fact that a lot of them are going to face, you know, their jobs coming to an end, either through retirement or defeat in July rather than November. So they'll begrudge that. But, I mean, one would expect them to have perhaps enough discipline not to make that too apparent and noisy and sort of focus on the election campaign, but behind the scenes.
David, I mean, I think good luck with that. I think already I've bumped into like 5 people who are absolutely livid and raging. The other thing which is really important in that, there were some MPs, by the way, who were going to use the summer to think about what they were going to do in defeat in terms of trying to get jobs and starting to make contacts. The other point which is really important is that the school holidays in Scotland are slightly different to the school holidays, and quite a few people have messaged me. I bumped into a couple of SNP MPs as well who are saying that a lot of people in Scotland may well be on their school holidays away. So I just feel this hasn't really been thought through that well.
Can I ask you, are we actually going to learn much about Labour's potential policies? Are we going to get a decent manifesto that's going to be revealing, or is it just going to say nothing, given how far they are ahead in the polls?
I think we are going to get more flesh on the bones, and we obviously saw that just last week, moving on from the local elections to these, these sort of 6 pledges. And that was, not a kind of landing destination. That was on the way to announcing more.
Quite safe.
They were quite safe, but I think safety is a key theme for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, partly because Labour is just not very good at winning general elections. In the last 100 years, only 4 Labour prime ministers have been elected. But the other thing, which I think they are going to be really honest about, is what they're going to inherit from an economic point of view. This is going to be very different from 1997.
But on this other issue, the other promise is immigration. He could be having flights off to Rwanda before more boats have started coming. He could be saying, well, what are you going to do about it? What's your plan? Where is your plan? So it could be you're constantly challenged.
Absolutely.
In an early election about what your plan is.
Look, Labour is definitely going to get challenged, and rightly so. It's a contest of ideas, and Labour shouldn't get an easy ride just because they're, miles ahead in the polls. But I think what the Labour Party will say, even if a few flights go off, the public, again, are not stupid. The Labour Party will crunch the numbers about just how many millions of pounds it's probably going to cost per person to go off and think, well, is that where you really want your taxes being spent? Do you think that's a good use of money? The other thing, just from a pure objective strategy point of view, which I'm surprised that Rishi Sunak's gone early. I mean, obviously, from a Labour point of view, I'm happier about that. But the longer they left it, the more it would become a referendum on Labour. Because if you've got sort of 4 or 5 months of Labour going into a general election with this massive, massive poll lead, the questions, it's almost like a lot of people could see Labour as sort of being the incumbent at that point. So that's another reason why I'm sort of baffled by that.
Although there was a view in Downing Street, I had a conversation with someone there a few months ago who said, look, until we actually call the general election, people aren't going to focus on it. Up until that point, it's all going to be, do you like the government or not? It's a referendum on the government. Only when you call the election, so the argument goes, is it a choice between the 2 parties.
OK, David, Aisha and Ed, thanks all very much indeed. Back to Sophie in Downing Street.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Well, here in Downing Street, things are starting to quieten down a bit. A couple of people leaving, but still very, very busy. And really, people here reeling, as around the country, with that shock announcement of the general election, 4th of July. I'm here with Ali Fortescue, our political correspondent. And what did you make of what the PM had to say?
I mean, even when he was saying the words, I couldn't really believe it. We always knew that, he's talked about the second half of the year, we always knew that the spring was an option for the election. But even so, the kind of speed at which these rumours in Westminster today turned to the lectern being out, the Prime Minister saying it, 4th of July, I think, you know, it came as a surprise, not just to us, but to many Conservative MPs this morning. I had quite senior Conservative MPs messaging me saying, what do I know about when the general election is going to happen? So I think it has come as a real surprise.
And it gives you a bit of a sense about how closely these things are locked down. I mean, the Chancellor was being put up for interviews this afternoon. You know, ministers were only being pulled at the last minute, so clearly on lockdown. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's one of the few cards that a sitting Prime Minister has to play, the choice of the timing of the general election. Why do you think he's gone for July?
It's fascinating. I mean, I think the point is, was this damage control? Are things only going to get worse? Of course, you know, we do have positive economic news today when it comes to inflation, and he's hoping, he said he wants to get flights off to Rwanda. It feels like maybe the best of what could be bad moments over the summer. Could we see more people coming across in small boats? Will that prove that perhaps that hasn't worked as a deterrent? Are people actually not going to feel any better off? Are interest rate cuts going to take longer than expected? So I think, you know, maybe this is a Prime Minister that thinks this is a moment to go. Someone's saying to me that universities aren't finished in July, so maybe that will help the Conservative vote. But, you know, there's all sorts of things that might play into this. Clearly, this is a Prime Minister that wants to make this, I think, about trust and about Keir Starmer rather than the Labour Party. Keir Starmer wants to make this an election about change. It could be an election about money and the fact that there's no money left, really.
Yeah, it does feel like that, doesn't it? Ali, thank you so much. It's great to have you back and talking about the election as well. Well, there you have it. What an extraordinary day in Downing Street. Rishi Sunak taking the gamble of his political life, going for a July election, the first July election since just after the Second World War. Is it going to be enough to overturn a 20-point deficit in the polls? That is the scale of the task for the Prime Minister. We'll see you in just a few moments' time.